Hey guys. This is part 6 of What If Naruto Perfected the Shadow Clone Jutsu. Hit like and subscribe if you like this one, and also please check the author in the description. Let's start.
We are pain, that's all. We are God.
Chapter 21, Changes, Prank Day 114. It was a bright, sunny day in Konoha, and Naruto felt it didn't fit with the mood around him at all, his own included. He was dressed in his finest, Iruka beside him. Ariko was a little farther down the path with the rest of the fashion squad, while Muramaru was to his left along with Ebisu. Today was the funeral for the chunin who had fallen during the invasion. The genin would be honored tomorrow, while the few fallen jonan would have individual funerals after that. The civilians, on their side, were slowly being buried all through the week. The will of fire is a hard thing, the Sandaime intoned clearly from his position at the podium. It is a flame in a person's heart that warms, protects, and feeds them. Like any flame, it must be carefully tended to lest it either go out or consume everything. He forced himself to stay rigid and not to react. Under his original face, Kiritori had only been his teacher for a few months, with no special bond between them. He was supposed a random face in the crowd of mourners, and nothing more. And that was the most difficult thing he'd ever done. The Hokage continued. Sometimes, however, there are lives that are sacrificed to the pyre. Young, old, it is beyond the realm of men to decide when one passes away. None can delay when the Shinigami comes for them, each in their own time. He focused on the words Iruka had shared that very afternoon. Kiritori had been old, and he'd gone willingly to battle. He'd fought as long as he could, and had passed the torch. Naruto had to do honor to his teachings. Therefore, he simply sniffed and held back. Iruka's hand squeezed his shoulder lightly in understanding. He didn't know what he'd have done if the chunin hadn't been there. Each man and woman we honor today answered the call with distinction, and fought until death took them. They were fathers, mothers, teachers, comrades, and so much more. Their actions have shaped the present and future, and now they rest with their predecessors. The Hokage looked around, then bowed his head. A moment of silence for the fallen chunin of Konoha. The village lives on, and they will be sorely missed. A wave of lowered heads followed, Naruto's being no different. Sensei, rest in peace with your family, Naruto whispered near silently. We'll continue in your stead. Muramaru couldn't say he remembered much of the funeral. Unlike Naruto, he could show how he felt, and he didn't let the opportunity pass. Even now that it was over, there were long traces left behind under his eyes. Ebisu, who had stood beside him the whole time, quietly led him away. The clone thought his newest sensei was accompanying him home, but the two of them ended up in a small apartment on the opposite side of Konoha. It reminded him of Iruka's place, even if everything was arranged differently. In particular, there was a glass bookcase full of colorful tomes in a clear place of honor. He sat down on a sofa while Ebisu went and gathered items from his kitchen. 2 cups and a small pitcher were placed on the table as the teacher took a seat opposite him. He filled both cups with liquid, putting one before the clone, then raised the other one. To those gone, he said simply. Muramaru grabbed his own cup and slowly raised it. As he did, Ebisu drank his own in one gulp, and the clone followed suit. The liquid burned as it went down, and the bunshin nearly choked. I am, as a person, not greatly fond of alcohol, but I cannot deny there are times where it has helped people, the special jonan said. And many drink themselves under the table to avoid the pain of loss. Since the funerals continue tomorrow, Team 1 will have the day off, and as such you may drink as much as you wish. I will make sure you do not suffer because of it. Really? Muramaru asked. Ebisu nodded. You are a genin, and as such an adult in the eyes of the village. It is well within your right to drink as much as you wish. My former sensei said the same when my own mother died long ago, and it still applies now. Muramaru thought for an instant. As much as forgetting the pain sounded good right now, it wouldn't help in the long term. And he didn't want to reveal something he shouldn't while impaired. A second later he remembered that clones couldn't even get drunk, so that idea would have been a bust anyway. The clone shook his head. No thanks, sensei. I'll have to learn how to deal with it. I have to go forward. The words stuck somewhat in his throat. Ebisu nodded, and pushed his glasses back up with a single finger. Indeed. Then, this is the next step to the path. He withdrew a scroll from his side. What is that? Your master's will, Ebisu replied solemnly. Muramaru's breath caught. Already? The teacher nodded. Yes. Wills in Konoha are generally read as soon as possible after the funeral, unless foul play is suspected. This is because they may contain time-sensitive materials, contracts, and the like. Is there anything urgent? The clone asked. Ebisu shrugged. I do not know. While, as your jonan sensei and legal representative, it is within my rights to do so, I prefer not to without your consent. Muramaru was silent for a moment. Could you look it over? If there's anything urgent. He didn't want to let Kuritori down, but he'd prefer to do this with the rest of the Narutos later. The special jonan nodded, then broke the seal. He read quickly through the document, eyes clearly going over every line. There is something about an oath. I've already made the oath, Muramaru announced. The reminder actually helped. While it had been made as Kuritori lay dying, it also brought back the satisfied smile on his master's face as he passed away. And such smiles had been rare from the man. Ebisu was silent for a little longer, then put the scroll down. There is nothing here that can't wait a few more days. There are specifics about your training written, but they can wait until you regain your mental equilibrium. Muramaru lowered his head. Thank you? Ebisu shook his head with a smile. No thanks are needed. As your sensei, it is my job to teach you all I can, and not all lessons are for the battlefield. There was a moment of silence before the clone rose and took the scroll in hand. I'll be going now. The special jonan nodded. Take care of yourself, he replied. We will see each other in 2 days when training starts again. And do not hesitate to contact me should there be any issue. I will, the student answered seriously. He then bowed and left. On the way back home, Muramaru couldn't help but to break into a small smile. The man might be rigid and serious, but he cared. And to the various Naruto clones, that was more than enough. Prank Day 115, Naruto ran. Since every genin he had been close to had made it through the invasion unscathed, he hadn't planned on going to this round of funerals. He'd first thought of spending the day with Gaara, but the Sand Genin had instead decided to follow Sarutobi's instructions, and hopefully meet with the rest of his family. Naruto wished him luck at that. Miyamoto had then come up and decided to take the opportunity to make his day off a full day of sword training. This morning, he'd been tasked with summoning dozens of lesser members of the rabbit court, small brown rabbits no larger than a chibo or monty. Said rabbits had then been equipped with blunted kunai and shuriken, and let loose in a zone of forest 20 or so kilometers from Konoha. In one way, they were his opponents today, even though he wasn't tasked with going after them. He was going to be their practice target. Naruto batted a shuriken out of the way, passing less than an inch beside the trunk of the nearest tree. He then diverted a kunai off course, not stopping for an instant. He'd quickly learn that the slower he went, the more projectiles would find him. The forest course Miyamoto had crafted was multiple straight lines through the woods, each half a dozen kilometers in distance, their path indicated by a length of string. He was to stay on the ground the entire time he ran while the many rabbits pelted him with blunted steel. He could use no techniques beyond dodging and sword work. And dodging alone wasn't enough. He was allowed 30 minutes of rest at every checkpoint before starting again, and even then Miyamoto used that time to instruct him in proper blade care. Right now, he was on his 4th stretch, and Miyamoto had added an extra level of difficulty. Sheath! The rabbit samurai's voice rang through the trees. Naruto instantly did so, not stopping his run. It still took him a couple of seconds, and a training kunai scrapped his face as it passed. His blade clicked home, and he didn't pause for a second before drawing again. His swing parried a pair of incoming weapons, and he dodged the last one with a quick movement of the head. And he kept on. The sun was falling when Miyamoto finally declared the exercise complete. After a dozen different stretches, Naruto was glad the exercise was done. He was sweaty as all hell, aching everywhere, and incredibly hungry. He'd eaten at some of the checkpoints, but not enough to really count. As soon as he was clean enough, he was gonna buy enough ramen to feed the entire ninja corps for a day. Drawing position! His rabbit sensei yelled suddenly. Naruto reacted instantly, taking the Iajutsu position he'd been taught. An even 10 clones stepped forward, copies of his own sword in hand. This is the last exercise for the day, Naruto, Miyamoto said. You are to defeat these 10 clones by yourself. Naruto nodded, and the Bunshin charged forward. His first strike upon drawing burst 2 in less than a second, and his follow-up claimed a third. He dodged 2 strikes, parried the next and slid forward, making the clone he just blocked and a second one behind him vanish. A single jump back gave him space to maneuver, and he sheathed his blade once more while in the air. His next battle strike claimed only a single clone, as the remaining Bunshin were cautious, and the rest fell quickly to Naruto's quick and precise strikes. That was way too easy, Naruto said as he stored his katana. They weren't coming at me seriously. They were, Miyamoto said, shaking his head. Those were simply the 10 clones I asked you to make before we started on this exercise. They showed the exact level of skill you had this morning. Tell me, why were they so easy to dispatch? The genin thought for a moment. Well, their attacks were easy to see coming. They also stepped much too close for that, he started, then realized what he was saying. After the numerous weapons he'd blocked, most of those not as easily seen, directed strikes by visible opponents weren't much of a challenge. He also knew from experience the exact range of his attacks, something his clones didn't, at least not to the same level. Even if they were moving at the same speed, he had a clear advantage. Indeed, the samurai confirmed with a nod. Normally, seeing improvement in oneself is something difficult, but your technique allows you to face yourself without much difficulty. Now, as a student, was this exercise fruitful? Yes. Naruto exclaimed, then bowed. Thank you, sensei. Miyamoto smiled. No thanks are needed. A hard-working student is all the reward a teacher needs. As I said before, this is the end of training for today. Good work, Naruto. You make your teacher proud. The rabbit then bowed and vanished. Naruto didn't wait and turned toward Konoha instantly. He had a speed-eating record to beat. Prank Day 117. Come in, Iruka said after someone knocked on his office door. It was early in the evening, and the teacher was going over the paperwork necessary to keep the academy running smoothly. Naruto came in. Hey sensei, he said with a smile and a wave. Good evening, Naruto, the chunin replied. I'm surprised to see you willingly coming to the academy when you no longer have classes here, he added with a smile. Ha ha ha, Naruto replied blandly. Well, if the student will not come to the teacher must go to the student. Iruka inclined his head. What do you mean? Did you think your training was complete? The genin asked. You may be able to use the Kage Bunshin now, but that alone doesn't bring you anywhere close to being a jonan. Oh, the chunin said, realizing now what this was about. Right. I do have a lot of paperwork to go through though. Kuritori's death had not helped things in the academy. There hadn't been a replacement dispatched yet. Leaving a clone behind won't be enough? Iruka shook his head. How about I leave a few clones behind to help? The teacher nearly said no automatically, then thought over it. Before, as Naruto was still a student, this would have been unthinkable, but now that he was a genin things were different. Having access to exam corrections wouldn't help him anymore, and he was no longer in competition with the former members of his class. Everything you learn in this room stays in here, correct? Naruto nodded empathically. No funny stuff? No pranks? More nods. Iruka rose. I'll trust you then. Do not make me regret it. His hand then flashed into the cross seal of the shadow clone technique, as did Naruto's. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. The 2 real ninja then left the office as the Iruka clones started ordering the 4 Narutos left behind. They went straight to the tunnels, and were halfway to the Iruhara basement when Naruto turned to his teacher. Can I ask a question? Of course. What's the deal with those D ranks? The genin asked. Those can't be real missions. Iruka smiled, having asked the same question to his own teacher a long time ago. They are. Naruto, do you think you can put any 3 newly minted genin together and make an effective team? Naruto instantly thought of Sasuke, and quickly shook his head. Of course not. Still, I'm sure there are enough real missions for a new team. Couriers and the like, possibly. The teacher shook his head. Take the members of your class, and pit each of them against 3 mildly talented bandits. Who do you think would win? The students, of course. Iruka raised an eyebrow. Every single time? There was a moment of silence. No, Naruto finally admitted. Unfortunately, not all students come with the same level of skill, Iruka explained. Some are better with jutsu while others are stronger or faster, some are better in theory and others in practice. The D-ranked missions are used to help evaluate students in various domains. For example, have you had to run after a cat recently? Naruto's eyes went wide. How did you know? Iruka smiled widely. The Fire Lord's wife has always been fond of cats, and even has a specific breeder for them in Konoha. She is, however, not as good at keeping them with her, and many have escaped repeatedly. I had to hunt one of those cats myself, years ago. What about it? Well, hunting that cat is like a beginner-level scout and capture mission, Iruka explained. It requires the same skill set, and is a good tool for jonan to test their genin in stealth, scouting and non-lethal capture. How about mending fences? General handicraft, along with the ability to follow orders and teamwork, the chunin replied. Teamwork is the main reason why some sensei might keep students from progressing to higher-level missions, and that's not something one can be sure about with after only a few days. Naruto pouted, but said nothing. The three of them had been on Team 1 for less than a week, and there had been 2 days without training. He couldn't deny that it wasn't enough to be certain about the team's skills. Naruto himself hadn't even met with Ebisu in the evening yet. The teacher and student found an empty spot to train in as soon as they arrived in the Iruka basement. So, what's the schedule, Uzumaki-sensei? Iruka asked with a smile. Anything special you want to work on? The blonde ninja asked. Iruka thought for a moment, but nothing specific came to mind. Surprise me, he finally said. Naruto sat pensive for a minute, then nodded. A couple of hand signs later, a black ball formed in his hand. You're handy with barrier ninjutsu, so let's go with something similar. Iruka stared. You know that this is a kinjutsu, correct? Yes, the genin nodded. It's a lot less dangerous than the other techniques I know, though. At least as long as you don't purposefully put too much fire inside. He released the sphere and only a short-lasting flame appeared. If you don't put fire chakra inside, it's no more powerful than a generic fireball. Iruka nodded. How do the seals go? Naruto made them one by one slowly. The first thing to focus on. Prank Day 118, Sasuke stepped into Konoha and instantly saw the issues there. The hole in the wall was a big clue, but the inside was showing numerous signs of destruction as well. What had happened here? Well, that explains the early recall, Kakashi said with an eye above his orange book. Sasuke could see his single eye taking in the details, building plans and scenarios in his mind. His jonin sensei might be lazy, but Sasuke couldn't deny the fact he was also a genius. The 4 of them went straight for the Hokage Tower, which at least seemed to have come through intact. On the way there, they crossed paths with Hinata Hyuga, who was wearing a chunin vest. He scowled at the sight. If a wallflower like her could have made it, he was a shoo-in for chunin. His team was what was holding him back. After the first exam which Sakura had abandoned at the last question, he'd ranted and raged at her for preventing him from being promoted. Sasuke took her side, saying the team wasn't ready yet. He didn't care about the team. He needed to grow stronger as quickly as possible. Then Kakashi rejoined them and confirmed that, yes, the entire group wasn't ready. By then, Sasuke's rage had control, and he yelled his sensei, blaming him for the current state of things. Kakashi endured his words stoically with his usual smile, then asked a single question as Sasuke tapered off. Are you a leader or a follower? Either of those. He yelled back. He was an avenger, a lone wolf. He didn't need people slowing him down. Kakashi stared down at him with the most serious look he'd ever given him. Then, you aren't a ninja. Ninja are either of those, and nothing else. If that's what you want, I'll go right to the Hokage and have you removed from the rolls. Why? Why only those choices? Kakashi scowled behind his mask. Because no single person can take on a well-led 3-member team of their level. The only way to fight such a group is to defend all the time, and wait for a mistake. And each member of a team can cover for the other's mistakes, the jonin explained in full seriousness. So, are you a leader or a follower? He repeated. Leader, Sasuke finally said, looking to the side. It was the better of the 2 choices. Then lead, their sensei said. You have 2 people here who'd follow your orders, so give them. Sasuke couldn't deny that. Sakura would throw herself into fire if he asked, and Sasuke clearly respected his abilities. They'd listen, at the very least. So he took another angle of attack. Aren't you supposed to be this team's leader? No, I'm this team's sensei. I may be your superior, but that doesn't mean I'm the one to give all the orders. I'm simply here to teach and protect you. Does the Hokage manage every single genin team? He's their ultimate superior. The white-haired man asked rhetorically. HRN Sasuke grunted, while the two others simply shook their heads. Why don't you teach then? Sasuke asked, grasping at straws. I've come to you for training dozens of times, and the only thing you said is that I wasn't ready. Kakashi's stare somehow got harsher. Because I train a team. Did a team ever come to me for training? Silence was his only answer. All had come alone requesting training. I thought as much. The next day, Kakashi got Team 7 a 2-month C-rank patrol mission on the border between fire and grass, and Sasuke started pushing his teammates hard. Surprisingly, the both of them took it seriously, and Kakashi never held back when asked for valid exercises. The worst he did was tell them they weren't ready for something, and when he did that he always had something to help them along the way. Team 7 reporting as ordered, Kakashi said as the group finally managed to meet with the Hokage after more than an hour's waiting. He then handed the village leader a scroll which the Hokage quickly read. Good, the Sandaime replied as he finished. A calm border is always a blessing. Team 7 dismissed. Kakashi, please stay behind. The three genin split then, each going their own way. Sasuke simply ambled, looking at the changes to the village and listening to the conversations. He wasn't in a hurry to get to an empty home. He was buying a tomato sandwich when he saw the dead last of his class walking toward the mission office. With a Thetais. He stepped to the side to watch the proceedings while better hidden. The tall man behind Naruto was obviously his jonan sensei, which meant this wasn't some form of prank. And that made the two others beside him his teammates. The boy wasn't anybody he remembered, but the girl was that one fangirl he'd brought to Konoha. A shiver went through his back in remembrance. Naruto could keep her. He wanted nothing to do with that girl. As the three genin disappeared, Sasuke realized that the next final exam for the academy wasn't until months in the future, and that's he'd passed in the last. That meant that Naruto's promotion wasn't through the normal channels. Sasuke finished his dinner in 3 quick bites, and returned to his information gathering. If someone like Naruto had managed to pass, that meant that big things had gone on while he was gone. And not only whatever had caused all damages. Information is power, and he wasn't going to be weak in any domain. His quest depended on it. Ebisu stepped forward onto Training Ground 6, which he'd reserved in the evenings for Naruto Uzumaki's training. He'd verified the last few days, and the boy was using said spot for training in the specified hours. Good, at least he was taking this seriously. He remained in hiding and watched as his student trained. The Uzumaki boy was fighting what was clearly a clone. They were going at each other with katanas in hand and no other weapon. The special jonin frowned. This hadn't been in the list of skills the blonde genin had given. Yet, watching him, it was clear that Naruto wasn't a beginner with the blade. His movements were fluid, precise, and quite fast. Ebisu himself wasn't specialized in kenjutsu, but he had no issue evaluating the skill level of students. Still, he needed to be sure. He withdrew a couple of blunted kunai from his vest and threw them at the pair, yelling incoming. As he did so, the two Narutos reacted instantly. The first easily batted the kunai in flight, while the other jumped, turned, then deflected the flying weapon. I don't seem to remember kenjutsu being in the list of skills you profess knowledge of, Ebisu said as he stepped out of his hiding post. Why is that? Well, Naruto replied, scratching the back of his head. I'm not that good. I'm getting better, but I'm not to the level I can call myself proficient yet. Ebisu shook his head. You are quite above the average level of a genin, which is more than enough for it to be noted. He looked down at the boy. Any other skill of note you might have forgotten to reveal? The Uzumaki boy locked himself into a complete skill listing. He repeated the items he'd originally revealed, and added quite a few more. Ebisu had no clue what the Oiroke and harem techniques were, had no easy way of testing for stealth, though he had to admit that the boy had made a good showing against Tora, and had seen nothing special in the boy's basic 3 techniques. The teacher then made a decision. Stop, he said, and his genin did so. You and I will be having a full contact spar, that will let me evaluate you properly. Naruto's eyes went wide. He hadn't done so with his clones. You sure? I wouldn't want to hurt you. Ebisu straightened haughtily. I am a special jonin. I doubt you could really harm me. Naruto wasn't convinced. How about you use a shadow clone? I've noticed you can use them. And how did you get that information? Naruto shrugged. I noticed you watching yesterday. Actually, it was his clone who had. And I asked Ariko this morning, who confirmed that you spent the entire 2 hours with her. Since there's not much use to sending an ordinary clone, that basically means a Kagekunshin. Ebisu nodded, accepting the reasoning. Indeed, I can use them. You would prefer fighting a clone? Naruto nodded. There was nothing lost in humoring him, so Ebisu generated a single clone. His reserves being what they were, 5 or more would be tiring to him, but he didn't think he'd need more than the one he made. The first part of the battle went as he'd expected it. Naruto generated a wave of clones, dozens strong, and they charged forward swords in hand. The clone dispatched a few with a fireball, then used rapid replacement to dodge and hunt unprepared clones. The teacher's Kage-bunshin had things well in hand when the one clone jumping toward him turned into a very naked and very stacked amorous girl. This distracted the clone for a second, but that second was all the Naruto's needed. The Ebisu clone found himself switched with another farther in the battlefield, and a bursting black sphere took him a moment later. What was that? The special jonan asked, baffled. It might simply have been a clone, but it still had all the instincts and skills of the real thing. That fire technique would have seriously hurt if not incapacitated him. Naruto generated another sphere. I showed you that one, didn't I? No, that. He pushed his glasses back into position, flustered. That transformation you did. Oiroku no Jutsu, Naruto explained. It's a distraction technique I invented while in the academy. It even took out the Hokage once. He didn't say that the reason he did so was because Muramura had noted the Hokage's favorite Eki book in a place of honor in Ebisu's apartment. The sensei took a deep breath to steady himself, then turned to his student. One more time, if you don't mind? He summoned another clone as Naruto nodded. That match lasted a lot longer. Ebisu was now prepared for the distraction technique, and didn't get caught. He dispatched clone after clone, but the numbers were endless, and after a long fight the teacher's Kage-bunshin finally vanished, having spent everything it had. So, sensei? Naruto asked as all the clones disappeared. Well, it is clear you have energy and stamina to spare, the special jonan finally said. Your techniques are also well practiced and used effectively. One thing I did notice, though, is that you aimed all of your attacks directly at your opponent. How is that an issue? Well, to give an example, those 3 beams of fire you shot simultaneously, you remember them? Ebisu asked. Naruto nodded affirmatively. Well, all 3 were aimed straight at me, the teacher continued. Now, what did my clone do? He jumped to the side, the genin answered. Exactly. Now, say one beam had gone straight for me, with the other 2 a foot or so on each side. What would have happened then? Ebisu asked with a smile. He would, Naruto said, thinking out loud. He would have had no choice but to replace himself. Indeed, Ebisu nodded. One thing to remember with attacks as powerful as your fire sphere is that hitting your opponent is more important than overpowering him. The injury one of those inflicts is enough to hurt if not incapacitate a normal opponent. Sending your attacks wider makes them more difficult to dodge, meaning they have to waste chakra to survive. And with your reserves, you're winning if you cause such an engagement. Naruto smiled and nodded. Thank you, sensei. I'll remember that. Anything else? Ebisu thought for a moment. Well, I noticed you count a lot on your clone cover for defense. What would you do if you couldn't use it? Like during a stealth mission, in a small space or against someone who can track the real you? The blonde genin had to admit the idea had never come to mind. I don't know. What do you recommend, sensei? Well, it depends on the situation, Ebisu started. In a confined room, you might want to. Prank Day 119. The Sandaime had received a note this afternoon, when Team 1 came requesting missions, that there would be a council meeting tonight. He smiled when he'd received it. The last time he was present, he'd mostly been a bystander, as he'd not had all the information necessary to make valid decisions. But this time, he had had an entire week to think about it, and he had a number of requests to put forward. Going to see Iruka in the academy ended up being pointless, as the real thing was already in Naruto's base training. As such, he made his way alone in the tunnels, once more disguised as his younger self. Luckily, he remembered the path pretty well. There wasn't an entire army at rest this time. The clones were now in groups here and there, clearly training in different techniques. A single Naruto then waved at him and switched right before his position. "Hey Gigi," he said with smile. "Good evening, Naruto," the Hokage thought for a moment. "Are you the original?" "Yup," Naruto answered. "I was training while waiting for you. You're the last missing member." "What were you training in?" Hiruzen asked. Combining the replacement and the tree-walking techniques, he created half a dozen clones, then they were gone the next instant. 3 appeared on the walls and managed to grab on after skidding for about a foot, while the 3 others tried for the ceiling. Only one of those managed to stick a foot in time, the other 2 bursting before they reached the ground. "Interesting," the village leader said, looking around. "I do not see Iruka. Is he already upstairs?" Naruto shook his head. "No, he's up there." He pointed toward the ceiling. Sarutobi found the chunin straight above their position. The man was sticking to the ceiling and fighting clone after clone with kunai and sword. An effective training method, I have to admit. One had to both fight and manage his chakra at the same time, and this position made certain methods of dodging impossible. "You aren't worried he might hurt himself in that fall?" Naruto shook his head and pointed toward one of the pools. There a dozen clones waited, all their eyes on the combat. They're there to switch with him if he falls. Head first in water is a lot less painful than on raw earth. Not wanting to be dunked made for a good reason to put one's best effort forward, too. It took a minute, but Iruka finally finished the clones remaining on the ceiling since Naruto had stopped spawning more. He looked down and, seeing the Sandaime there, quickly made his way down to join him. "Good evening, Hokage-sama," the chunin said as he was offered a towel. He then wiped his face before handing it back. "Good evening yourself, chunin. I am happy to see you training hard," Hiruzen said with a smile. "Will I be seeing you in the jonan trials one day?" "I hope so, Hokage-sama," Iruka answered. "It is still some way off, but I hope to one day give a good account of myself there." "Good. I'll be waiting, chunin," Sarutobi replied. "Now we have a meeting to go to, do we not?" "Of course," Naruto said, making a cross seal, though no clones appeared this time. "Let's go," he added with a wave as a number of bunshin made their way in the group's direction. It didn't take much time for everyone to be seated. This time the rabbits weren't summoned, leaving Ichibo the sole representative of that group. Hiruzen also recognized the new face there, even though it was another Naruto, which he supposed was Nico. "Okay all, welcome to the weekly meeting of those in the know," Naruto exclaimed from his spot at the end of the table as soon as everyone was in place. "Sorry for the extra day between meetings, but I was busy with Edisu yesterday. Status report." No one had much to say there. A couple of everything fine along with a somewhat longer report regarding a group called the Taurison. It took less than 3 minutes for the point to be closed. "Merchants, you're up next," the real Naruto said as the others finished. "How's the network doing?" "Better and worse at the same time," the clone in the middle of that group replied. "We've gotten a few new customers through Tucci, but the general trend is that people order less. I can't say if it'll pick up once more when repairs to the village are done, but I hope that's what happens." "How about our saboteurs?" Kyuha asked. The Hokage moved forward, very intent on this subject. Ninja operating in his village without his knowledge wasn't something that should be happening. "No trace of them, not since they abandoned their base," the merchant clone replied. "They may have abandoned this type of work after what happened, but we have no way to be sure. We still have guards with every shipment, just to make sure." A number of clones nodded, and the subject was closed. "Information network, your turn." Nico was the one who rose. "We have a lot of data, rumors and the like, but no way to know what to focus on. Even with clones, sorting that information takes hours if not days. Worse is, those sending the reports have no idea what should or shouldn't be included." "That ties into something I wanted to bring up," the Hokage said, rising. "If I wanted to have someone else sit on these meetings, what would be necessary?" Naruto shrugged. "You're the Hokage, Gigi. You can pretty much bring who you want," the real boy thought for a moment. "Who did you have in mind?" "My spy master," Sarutobi answered simply. "He's currently out of the village, looking for Orochimaru, but he should be back within a few days. He'd probably be the best person to put your information network into shape. I don't see any issue since, as spy master, I suppose he can be trusted with the prank." Hiruzen nodded at that. "Any issue?" he asked around. Nobody brought any argument against. Done then, Naruto declared. Information network, keep piling up your data. We'll have a specialist helping us starting next week. Anything else, Gigi? Indeed, the Hokage said with a smile, drawing a pile of scrolls from his pockets and putting them on the table. What are those? Miramara asked from his place beside Naruto. It was clear that the rest of the clones were also curious. These, Hiruzen said, taking one of the scrolls in hand. These are requests from ANBU members to be transferred to the Dukashi. The Dukashi? Iruka asked, and was echoed by a number of clones. I've never heard of them. His group, the Hokage continued, handing the scroll to Kyoha, who sat on the opposite side of the table. The clone still had his ANBU garments and his bizarre hair color, though he'd removed the mask. What? The clone exclaimed in surprise. That's not all, Hiruzen continued. I've had 3 different meetings this week where I had to pretend that I knew everything about the Dukashi, and that I'd personally created them as an anti-invasion force. Some even went up to me demanding names. Naruto lowered his head. Sorry, Gigi. Don't be, Sarutobi said with a smile. I had a good laugh about it. Your team probably saved the village dozens of casualties, if not the entire battle. Me having to pretend knowledge is a small price to pay compared to that. What should I do with this? Kyoha asked. Check them, the village leader replied. I'd like if possible to have actual members of the Dukashi in existence, in case it ever becomes needed to make a public showing. I'd like this place to remain hidden for as long as possible. A trump card, if you will. Kyoha nodded and reached for the rest of the scrolls, which were duly handed to him. Anything else? Naruto asked everyone. I have one last thing, Hiruzen said, still up. Naruto nodded. Go ahead. I have another job for one of your clones. A female one, this time, the Hokage explained. Which is? Secretary, Sarutobi said. My current one has left my employ, and it is the perfect place for one of your clones. It would allow you to pass information to me easily, it would prepare you for the work you'll have to do if you ever take my place, and would permit me to reach you easily. He smiled widely. That fact that you can be trusted with such a position is also a great help. Naruto thought about it for a moment. One more clone wouldn't hurt, not at the level they were. Anything special you need for that clone? Not re. The Hokage started, then stopped. Actually, yes, the man said with a smirk. A specific hench, actually. One that will allow me to notice her more easily. Anything else that needs to be discussed? Multiple no's answered him. Meeting concluded, next one in a week. Everyone made their way out, save Naruto, who went to the Hokage. So Gigi, tell me what you need. Well, first, this tall. He indicated a height with his hand. White blonde hair up to the shoulder blades. Naruto did a first transformation. Whiter than that. Reddish brown eyes and... Chapter 22, Faces New and Old. Prank Day 120. Miramara had pushed it back as long as possible, but he could no longer do so. He'd finally mastered the last training exercise of the sharp fist he'd been taught, and he needed guidance to continue. As such, it was time to read Kuratori's will. The clone had postponed it until now, as after it things would be final, and his fellow Narutos had followed his lead. This was the last message from his fallen sensei, and waiting gave the illusion that he was still somehow there, if only in part. Still, he had to keep on and not stagnate. He'd sworn to keep the style alive, and as such needed to master it completely. Ebisu had confirmed that there were instructions for him inside, and these could no longer wait. The first part was read through quickly. It was all legalese, pointing out the disposition of his assets and properties. Then came the man's burial requests. A plot had been reserved for him beside his wife and children, and other miscellaneous details. And last was a personal message for him. Muramaru, if you are reading this, it means I have died. My plan was to update this document upon your graduation. As I didn't, I have either died before then, or was unable to update it at that moment. I do not know how I died. My health was no issue upon writing this document, and I cannot predict what might have caused my death. Regardless of what it was, I will ask you for one boon. Do not grieve unnecessarily. It took your entry into my life to recognize that, before you, I had been waiting for death to claim me. My reasons might have been valid, but I can now see that I passed dozens of opportunities for growth and happiness because of that. As your teacher, I urge you not to follow my path. You have great things before you, Do not let sadness hold you back. The second thing I must do is thank you. Not only did you bring me out of my spiral of despair, but you made me feel needed once more. You have no idea how much I needed that, and for that you have my eternal gratitude. I know I am not the most demonstrative of masters, but be certain that I am proud of you. I am honored to have met you, and am full of pride at your growth. You were, and still are in my mind, my youngest son. I had planned on adopting you formally post-graduation, but it seems death had other ideas. As such, the Hyojin name is yours if you wish. I do not know what happened to your previous family, and it has no impact. I know that you will bring the Hyojin name honor if you choose to use it, and, should you not, I will understand. It is you who is important, not what name you carry. Regardless of your decision, I have placed the properties I own and most of the funds I've acquired in your hands. Do with them as will. They are yours without restriction. Lastly, the sharp fist. In what little time I've known you, you have already made good strides in the family style. I am certain that you will continue to do so in the future, and I have left behind scrolls to help you on your way. But first, the oath. If you have already recited the oath before at least 2 witnesses, you may skip this part. If not, please do so before continuing. I personally swore the oath before my jonan sensei, my teammates, and the Hokage himself, and I am sure he would make himself available for such an act. Once you are oath-bound, return to the dojo where I trained you. Hidden at the back of the calligraphy on the walls are seals, which contain the scrolls written by my ancestors, my family, and I. The seal at the bottom of this document will be required for you to open them. There will be a scroll with your name on it there. It points out the normal path taken through the style. You may deviate from it as you will. I did the same when young, as did my father and his father before him. I know you will do the style proud. Now go, and do not look back. You brought an old man happiness in his last days. My time is gone, and yours is only beginning. Remember me fondly, and I will see once more in the far future. The rest of the family and I will be waiting for you on the other side. May the will of fire always be with you, Hyojin Kuritori, 11th head of the Hyojin family. Muramura cried as he read the words out loud, and he wasn't the only one. The real Naruto before him was standing stoically, tears flowing freely from his eyes, while Ichigo was on Ariko's left shoulder with a much-used tissue. The 4 of them were the ones who had been in the arena on the fateful day, and the ones who'd been in most of the classes with their former teacher. What will you do? Naruto said between sniffles. About the name? That was the main point left to discuss. The oath was done and training would go on. Muramura thought for an instant. I'll ask the Hokage. He'll know better what it implies. He smiled a little through the tears. I'll take it, if I can. Both Ariko and Naruto nodded at that. The 3 then split up, Naruto going back downstairs while Ariko left for her own place. Muramura took a few minutes alone to cry his last tears, then stood and went straight for the dojo. He needed to do honor to his style. And from the next day on, he was known as Hyojin Muramaru, 12th head of the Hyojin family. Prank Day 122. Ebisu wasn't much of a drinker. He had his own vices and knew about them, and preferred them to the loss of control that came with alcohol. As such, there was only a single reason that he went into bars. That is, to socialize. He wasn't much of a social person, but there were things that could only be learned from people. As such, he went once a week to the bar most frequented by the higher-ranked ninja of Konoha. The fact that the many jonin sensei in the village tended to gather there was only a bonus. Hey, look who's here, a special jonin at the counter said. The great teacher himself. That was his own nickname, which was only used in places like this one. He hid the fact, but he was always proud of it. Around on me, the man continued. For the newest of those saddled with brats. Here, here, came the cry from most of the ninja around. Ebisu stood stoically as people rose to offer him congratulations, or to commiserate with his loss of freedom. He'd expected such a spectacle, which was why he'd skipped last week's visit. Luckily, it didn't last too long, and he found himself free to take a seat at a table he'd never sat at before, though he'd never been never far. The Jonin Sensei's table. Currently, both Sarutobi Asuma and his on-off girlfriend Yuhi Kurinai were present, along with 3 of the older Jonin Sensei. Kakashi was absent, which wasn't surprising, and Guy was out of the village at the moment, as were most of the others. Congratulations on your team, Shikoma-san, the the female teacher said as he sat down. Congratulations on the success of your students, Yuhi-san, Ebisu replied as he took a small sip of his drink. 2 promoted out of 3, that is a very good result, especially counting on the shortened tournament. I can't take credit for Hinata, she immediately countered. Someone else trained her, and this teacher got more results in a month than I did in 3. Whoever he or she is, that is the person who deserved those words. Then congratulations on Shino's promotion, Ebisu continued. He was clearly one of yours, and he showed it in the arena. I nearly didn't pick up his genjutsu myself. Kurenai simply lowered her head to hide her slight blush. Asuma came to her rescue. How is it, having your own kids to deal with? Tiring, he answered. Even with the many students I've trained before, 3 at the same time is exhausting. He sighed. I don't remember having so much energy at that age. Don't we all? One of the older jonin said. Still, I can't complain. The 3 of them already work well enough together, and they don't shy from training. Ebisu continued. It could be worse. Another of the older sensei turned to him. You've got the blonde menace, right? He finally said. That and 2 civilian genin? Ebisu nodded. I wouldn't want to be in your shoes, he exclaimed. He should never have made it out of the academy. He didn't see the dark look the 2 younger sensei gave the man. The special jonin shook his head. No. While it is clear his basics need work, he is more than talented enough for genin rank. His chakra capacity is absurd, and he has the tools to use it. Close up the holes in his education, and he'll be more than ready for promotion to chunin. If not farther, he mentally added. You're shitting me, the older chunin replied. He's not, a new voice added from behind Ebisu. I've seen the kids work, and I can believe it. The special jonin had to think for a moment before the man's name came back to him. Kenden-san, was it? The stocky jonin nodded in confirmation. I did not know you've worked with Naruto. More like I was called to verify his work, Takuno answered. I'm probably Konoha's foremost specialist in traps, and he got me. Easily at that. He smiled as he recalled the memory. With good training, he'll be a trap specialist right soon, mark my words. He did specify trapping as one of his main skills, Ebisu thought for a moment. What do you recommend? He then added, moving the empty chair beside him for the jonin to take a seat. Takuno quickly accepted the invitation. Well, there's quite a bit. The boy's wire placement is good, so chakra wires is a natural next step. Fuinjutsu is also a good one, as he's. The discussion between the 2 lasted for more than an hour, and by the time they were done they were the only ninja remaining at the table. Ebisu had a scroll full of notes, since he never trained a trap master, and Takuno was clearly happy to discuss his main area of talent. The special jonin realized how late it was when he reached for his glass and found it empty. It was his 3rd one, which was 2 more than usual. I'll have to go, he finally said, rolling the scroll back and slipping it inside a pouch. Want to continue some other day? Takuno asked. Ebisu nearly said yes, then realized something better. Are you often busy in the evenings? He asked instead. The jonin shook his head. Not unless I'm on mission. Ebisu smiled. Naruto trains alone in the evening, 6 days a week, in Training Ground 6. Would you be interested in teaching him a few days here and there? Would I ever? Takuno said, rising from his chair. He'll go far, and all the better if I can help on the way. Then I'll be glad to have you as assistant teacher for one of my students. I'm sure you'll do better than me on the subject of traps. The sensei extended his hand to seal the deal. The 2 men shook with a smile. It was the beginning of a new partnership. Prank Day 125, Jiraiya, as the member of the Sannin remaining in Konoha, was well known by the population. As such, he strolled straight from Konoha's doors to the Hokage Tower. He scowled as he passed the zones most affected by the destruction. He saw the invasion as a personal failing. He was amongst those who knew Orochimaru the best, and was Konoha's spymaster to boot, only for something that big to pass by him. It shouldn't have happened. Worse was the fact that he'd lost the man's trail. The tracks had gone cold not long after he'd entered Rice Country, and he'd wasted 3 days trying to find hide or hair of his former comrade. He'd had to give up and go home without results, something that ate at him inside. As an important part of Konoha's military, no one stopped him, even once inside the Hokage's tower. Only the ANBU did so on average, and they were keeping to their posts. So, he went straight for his sensei's office. Jiraiya didn't become spy master by not paying attention to detail. He logged 3 different rumors to follow up on, noted one missing A and B member, and noticed that the Hokage had gotten a new secretary. As he did for any new person in the tower, he committed her appearance to memory. Long white hair, flowing straight down, split straight in the middle. Almond-shaped face, with expressive reddish-brown eyes. The Sannin estimated her half a foot short of 2 meters. He also wasn't surprised at the size of her bust. Hiruzen was known for certain tastes, which Jiraiya had inherited as his student. Hers was impressive, even seated behind a desk like she was. His eyes noted the last detail right as he pushed open the door to the Hokage's office. There was a small plaque at the side of her desk with her name on it. Tsuya. It took half a second for that fact to reach Jiraiya's brain, and he froze right there halfway in the door. He stopped like that for a second as facts clicked inside his mind. Then he stepped backward, and turned toward this Tsuya. Yes, can I help you? She asked, inclining her head to the side. Jiraiya cringed. She even had the voice right. Can you stand up for an instant? She thought about it for an instant. Sure, she finally answered, and rose from her chair. Jiraiya noted that he'd gotten the height right, then imagined her wearing green and gray, and paled as the result came to mind. He had a sudden urge to get right out of the city and find his female teammate, just to make sure she didn't step within 100 leagues of this place. Instead, he took a deep breath and charged inside the Hokage's office. Good, Jiraiya, I was starting to worry, Hiruzen said as he looked up from a document. What do you have for me? The Sannin ignored the question and made sure the door was closed behind him. Then, he activated all the security seals he knew about, which was most of them. Only then did he fix his teacher with a glare. Sensei, why do you have the star of my first Ika book sitting behind a desk in front of your office? Sarutobi smirked. Sometimes, revenge is living well, with a good treat for the eyes. Also, age and treachery will always beat youth and skill. Jiraiya's glare intensified. You do know that if Tsunade ever sees her, I am a dead man. And that is if I'm luckily. If I'm not, she'll keep me alive for years just so I suffer more. You're exaggerating, the Hokage replied. She's one of the 2 people who came closest to killing me, and that was simply for peeping. The Sannin exclaimed. If she finds out I based one of my characters on her, there's no saying what she'll do. He thanked the kami every day that Tsunade's hatred of perversion kept her from reading his books. I'll take care of it if it ever becomes an issue, the Hokage said, closing this discussion. Now, what about your mission? Orochimaru's gone to ground in Rice, Jiraiya replied. I leveled at least one of his bases there, but I can bet it's not the only one. I wouldn't be surprised if there were some in the surrounding countries either. Prisoners? A few, but no one important, the Sannin replied. The place I wiped from the map was clearly a staging area, probably for the invasion. I'll have to extend my network in Rice, as it clearly either compromised or ineffective. That brings another point I wanted to discuss. Hiruzen pressed a button on his desk. Yes, Hokage-sama? Tsuya's voice came from the intercom. Tsuya-san, please bring my guest an IT, if you would. Green with sugar. At once, Hokage-sama. They didn't have to wait long before the secretary came in, carrying a tray. She offered a cup to Jiraiya first, then to the Hokage. She then stood to attention. Your will, Hokage-sama? For when is the next meeting of those in the know scheduled? Hiruzen asked with a smirk. There was something in there, Jiraiya could tell. Barring extenuating circumstances, tomorrow evening, Hokage-sama, the woman quickly answered. Thank you, he replied, and handed her a pile of folders. Please file these with their respective offices. Be careful not to miss anything. Tsuya bowed. Of course not, Hokage-sama. By your leave. Hiruzen nodded, and she quickly made her way out. The room was silent for a moment before Jiraiya spoke up. Do you know if she has any acting experience? 'Cause I heard they were planning a movie based on my first novel. If he was going to die, better to do it for something great. Again, Sarutobi smirked. You'll have to ask her yourself, Jiraiya. The twirl of the Hokage's lips clearly indicated he knew something more about this. Anyway, give me a complete report of your projects. I'll have something for you to work on, barring any emergencies. The sage took a sip of his drink and sat down. Well, first is Orochimaru. His tracks died 2 kilometers for Tagure, and nothing I could do allowed me to get anything else. He's been. Prank Day 126. Jiraiya didn't know what to think of the current situation. He was currently a shadow clone, hidden under one of his least used disguises, following his sensei Hiruzen, who was disguised as a 14-year-old version of himself. He'd been surprised at the hidden path they'd taken, not at its location, but at its existence. As spy master, his knowledge of the city was greater than any, save possibly his sensei, and he'd not known about this path. It would have been something else if it had been newly built, but all indications were that it was older than that. The sage estimated that it was at least 10 years old, and quite possibly much older. The clear lack of maintenance made it difficult to ascertain a date specifically. The Sannin dropped his disguise the second Sarutobi removed his, which was when they came in sight of what he supposed was their goal. He was even more surprised to see his godson waiting right at the gate. "Good evening, Hokage-sama," the blond boy said in welcome. "Good evening yourself," Hiruzen replied with a wave. "Can you point me to the original, or is he already seated and waiting?" The false boy smiled. "I can't get one past you, Hokage-sama," he answered as he turned. "He's farther back, training with Iruka." "How did you catch me?" "The real Naruto would have called me Gigi," Sarutobi replied as he stepped forward. "And I notice you clones keep from doing so." The Bunshin bowed. "Step inside, Hokage-sama, Jiraiya-san." The two did so, but Jiraiya stopped once he'd made a single step inside. The place was huge, etched straight into the stone, and every few meters there was another Naruto. They were doing just about everything, reading, training, laughing, and eating, with no visible rhyme or reason. His sensei walked forward as if this scene was common, waving at welcoming clones and calling others by name. He quickly arrived at a large group of what he supposed were Bunshins, all watching something in the middle of the mob. A place opened itself for Hiruzen without him saying a word, and Jiraiya sneaked right behind the man and looked over his shoulder. Both what he supposed was the real Naruto and a chunin in his 20s were blinded and fighting with wooden swords in the middle of the ring of onlookers. The many reports he'd gotten from Hiruzen about Naruto's life gave a good idea who the man was: Yumino Iruka, one of his godson's closest allies. The two fought some more while the two elder ninja watched. The two were evenly matched in movement speed, but it was clear that Iruka was better at fighting blind, while Naruto's Kenjutsu was visibly more polished. As such, the two were pretty evenly matched. 4 more exchanges came and went before Iruka managed to sneak in a hit with a kick to the shin. It wasn't powerful enough to hurt severely or incapacitate, but it put Naruto on the defensive. Iruka didn't let the opening pass, and attacked relentlessly. His greater strength made it so that the boy was forced backward more and more, until a well-placed hit finally managed to disarm him. "Game!" a clone on the side yelled. "TCH," Naruto scowled as he removed the blindfold. "You're much too good at this." "It comes with experience," Iruka replied with a smile. "I have a few years on you still, and blind fighting was something my first sensei focused on much. You'll get better in time." "Indeed," Hiruzen said as he stepped forward. "You're already better at this than most genin, and there are some things that only time can help master." "Gigi!" Naruto exclaimed as he turned. "I hope I didn't make you wait too long?" He shook his head. Time spent watching the youth of Konoha improve is never wasted. "Now, everything ready for the meeting?" "Of course," Naruto said, crossing his hands together for a seal. Jiraiya had expected more clones to appear, but no such thing happened. Instead, the hands came apart after a second, and he made his way toward one side of the building. Various copies joined him, as did Iruka and Hiruzen. A bunny even jumped from head to rest in his hair. The Sannin wasn't far behind. It didn't take long for everyone to be seated around a long table. Jiraiya's own seat was right beside his sensei's, and the many clones clearly had specific places. Iruka was right next to the real Naruto at the end of the table. "You want to lead the meeting, Gigi?" Naruto asked. The Hokage shook his head. "Your place, your group, your show," he countered with a smile. Knowing his sensei, he appreciated the fact that he was an equal around this table and not the one everyone looked up to. "Right," the boy said with a nod. "Welcome, members, to the meeting of those in the know," Naruto exclaimed. "For the 3rd week in a row, we have a new face here. Please welcome the Toad Sage, the self-proclaimed super pervert, Jiraiya of the Sannin." The sage smiled and bowed, saying nothing. Being a talented spy, he knew when to talk and when to listen, and this was clearly the second. There was too much here that was unexplained for him to step forward. Also, for those not informed, let me introduce the latest head of the Hyojin clan, Hyojin Muramaru. He continued. Said youth rose and bowed formally to those at the table. He then quickly took back his seat. Everyone here is busy, so let's make this quick. Status report, Naruto said, turning to a clone with a big book beside him. Said reports passed quickly. The merchant network was still waiting on the rebuilding, the Dikeishi hadn't finished going over the possible recruits, the Torisan was still doing police work, an agreement hadn't yet been reached on what to train in. As always, Jiraiya made note of everything, committing it to memory. There was much information in there, and if he wanted to figure this place out he would have to go over it more than once. Naruto looked around as everyone finished. Anyone have anything to bring up? Gigi? Outside the request from last week, no, Saratobi said with a shake of his head. My newest secretary's work is more than satisfactory, and the quick access to information is perfect. That's between Nico and our newest member, Naruto said, looking toward Jiraiya. Have you informed him of what's required of him? No, Hiruzen said with a smile. I wanted him to see this place beforehand. Jiraiya countered with a smirk. You want me to whip his network into shape as an information-gathering tool, he replied with seriousness. You sure you didn't give him a hint? The Hokage's secretary is part of your group, and she's feeding information to the Hokage, he explained. You have a number of merchants on your payroll, and judging by the number of people representing them here, they are numerous enough to gather information. I heard about the Torisan, and they're a mercenary group currently stationed in Wave, which means your sources aren't only in the village. With the invasion that just passed, it's simple logic to deduce that you aren't satisfied with your current information network. Naruto's face went slack under surprise. He is my spy master for a reason, you know, the Hokage pointed out. Meeting adjourned? Naruto nodded quickly. Meeting adjourned, he quickly said. Nico, Jiraiya, please stay behind. We'll go over what the network needs to be useful. Jiraiya looked to his sensei, who was rising from his seat. A simple nod confirmed that he was to stay behind. I'll be waiting for your report about this in our next evening meeting. He put his hand on Jiraiya's shoulder. Good day, student. You'll see we had much less to fear about your godson than we thought. Try not to stay too late, old man. Jiraiya countered with a smirk. I'll catch you later. Indeed, the Hokage said as he walked out. The rest of the participants had already done so, leaving the sage with his godson and Nico, who was clearly a shadow clone. Why he had a name Jiraiya hadn't figured out yet. Well, at least you've done your work, Jiraiya finally started after a minute of silence. I'm Jiraiya, Sage of Toads, well-known writer and the envy of all those who like the pleasures of the flesh. I'm also Konoha's spy master, though that detail evades most. From what you said, you already have a network. How many people are in it? Naruto and Nico looked at each other, clearly unsure. Depends on your definition of people, I guess. The sage sighed. Contacts? Pen pals? Informants? None received an answer. Outside of you, who's part of the network? Well, Nico here for sure, Naruto started. The Sannin shook his head. Clones don't count. That means, Naruto answered. Gigi and Iruka. And you, I suppose, he quickly added. Jiraiya scowled. He was clearly missing something. You mean that every one of your contacts is a clone? Naruto nodded. That was going to be the shortest lasting spy ring in the history of man. Why? The sage asked. Why not? Shadow clones are easy to make, have great communication, and can use techniques. They're perfect for such things. And how long can you maintain a clone, brat? Jiraiya replied, starting to get irritated. Naruto looked at Nico again. The record's what, 140 days? The clone nodded. Yes. The first big training group. They've taken hits, but most council members are from that generation. What? Jiraiya roared, rising from his chair. You mean that Muramaru boy? Clone, Naruto pointed out. The genin girl? Clone, Nico countered. The ANBU member? Jiraiya said, clearly grasping at straws. His jaw was hanging wide in surprise by now. Clone, the two Narutos chorused in a sing-song voice. The Sannin fell back into his chair. And, including clones, how many contacts do you have? Nico fell back to the folder that was before him. I don't have exact numbers and clones, but I have the number of places covered. Do tell. Nico did so. Jiraiya's eyes grew big and his jaw went once more for the floor. Even with a single clone in each of those places, Naruto had a network that rivaled his. And worse was, it couldn't be that old. He grabbed a sheet of paper from the table and withdrew a pen. Start explaining. It's gonna be long. I don't care. He'd planned a visit to his favorite brothel, but that no longer mattered. He needed to get to the bottom of this, or it would eat him inside. Go. Well, it started with Mizuki, Naruto said. Have you heard about him? I have. He even had a day scheduled with the trader. There was information there, and a lesson to be taught. You do not mess with Jiraiya's godson. Well, I took him down, as you've probably heard. Thing was, his giant shuriken had been poisoned, and… As the story continued on, Jiraiya started smiling. He'd known he would have to pass his contacts to another, and feared Naruto wouldn't be the right kind of person to take care of his network. What a fool he'd been. With Naruto at the helm and a few months of training, Konoha was going to feared on the intelligence level like they'd never been. His home was secure for a couple more generations, he could tell. Prank Day 128. Wave had changed in the past months. The festivities had tapered off, and the population had thrown itself into work. The bridge had quickly been finished, the population helping free of charge. The people had then turned to the fields, preparing them as much as possible for the next spring. The winter would be tough, and the next harvest probably wouldn't be as good as those previous, but a few years like this and Wave would be booming. Jaga, formerly known as Niqni, watched as the people went, smiling all the while. Over the last month, most of Gato's former mercenaries left the island, a large part of them as soon as the bridge was completed. Without Gato's leadership, the combatants hadn't tried anything. There had been a few issues at first between the mercenaries and the Thetais, but they'd stopped after the first execution. Jaga had been the one to do it. He disliked the act, but agreed it was necessary. The criminal had been warned numerous times, and he'd still been caught in the act of raping someone. He'd been judged with the Thetais in presence, and even other mercenaries had testified against him, bringing proof of previous crimes of a similar nature. He'd sworn during the entire trial that he'd kill them for what they'd done, and everyone agreed that exile wasn't enough, and that prison wasn't punishment enough. As such, death had been the penalty. At least, Jaga thought, he'd made it as painless as possible. The fact that the law now had teeth dissuaded anyone else from trying anything. The bloodiest mercenaries moved out quickly, and the others slowly left. That is, those that did not find new jobs. Some, who'd been more respected than most, were offered places in Wave. There were numerous empty houses, and there had been a few relationships started between mercenaries and townspeople. But many came to the Thetais for recruitment. The clone who'd gotten the idea for the group hadn't planned on them attracting recruits, but it still happened. There were mercenaries who were looking for a good group to work with, and others that had simply left their home wanting to learn to fight, drunk on romantic stories of samurai. There were even ronins abandoned by their families or left with only mercenary work, who were grateful for a place in a real troop. And most of those, the Naruto clones did not have the heart to send away. As such, the Thetais had nearly doubled in size. And it was looking like this wasn't done. Jaga turned around, continuing his patrol, when a message came for him via update. That was rare, since the pretend samurai limited their use of ninja techniques for their cover. He was being recalled instantly, and another clone would take his place. Jaga didn't delay, going directly toward the mansion that the Thetais had been offered. It had been the former house of a wealthy merchant of Wave, who had been eliminated by Gato as competition. The group hadn't refused the offer only because it was one of the rare places that the entire group could use. He went straight for the meeting room, which was where he had been called to. He was the last, with the rest of the informal heads of the group already there. Tora, the clone who had created the Thetais, was in his usual seat at the head of the table, with Rayon and Hyo at his left and Kuga at his right. He took the other seat at the right, passing by the man who was coming with a request. The Konoha fashion group had started the clones into noticing details about people and what they wore. This one had quite a bit of contradictory information. The man was wearing clothes soaked in sweat, grass and dirt, but there were clues that he wasn't a peasant. There were remains of embroidery over the hem of his clothes, and the colors were still unnaturally vivid for peasants, even with the grime. "We are all here," Tora said in his grave voice. The clones had found that mercenaries responded better to such a sound. What is your request? I am Getsuko, and I have come a long way to speak with honorable samurai such as yourselves. My lord's land, in San no Kuni, had been plagued by 2 rival Yakuza families who have the region in a stranglehold. Tears started to flow from his eyes. Worse, they have been steadily assassinating those in power, either opposing them or working for their rivals. My masters, the Jin family, have slowly been eliminated one by one, and now only the last heir is left. He bowed low, so low that one could get the impression that he was pushing into the floor. Please, noble warriors, answer this desperate request of a lowly man. Please save the last member of my lord's family, and rescue our lands from oppression. I will pay any price needed, if only the security of my lord's family can be assured. Silence rang in the room as his plea ended. He didn't move from his place on the floor, and his tears could still be heard falling to the ground. The 5 looked at each other, all lost. What should they do? Chapter 23, New Horizons, Prank Day 128. Tora found every member of his council looking at him for answers. He didn't have any. As such, he went for more information. Getsuko, was it? The leader of the Taurison asked in his grave voice, to which the still bowing man nodded slightly. I am to understand that this is not a simple bodyguard mission, correct? If it was that, it would be easy. While clones weren't solid, a mix of real members of the group and Kage Bunshin could protect one from most dangers. But it didn't sound that way. I am afraid not, Samurai-sama, the retainer answered. While my lord's life and health require protection, so does our people. The Yakuza are pushing horrible drugs in the city, stifling commerce with protection rackets, and running prostitution rings with total impunity. The man fell to his knees, and his tears redoubled. I came to the Taurison based on what I've heard in rumors, and the stories on the island itself convinced me. Please, O Samurai-sama, work the miracle you performed here in my lord's land. Rid us of those who would destroy our region, and bring prosperity once more. Getsuko was clearly begging by that point. Tora looked around once more, and found his teammates' faces mirroring what he expected his own to be. They'd stepped into the situation in wave because it was the right thing to do, because the people needed protection. When he had the flash of insight that led to the creation of the Taurison, he'd expected them to vanish back to nothingness once their mission was done. That idea had been dashed when people started coming to them for work, and now their reputation was drawing them back toward violence. There was a good minute of silence before Tora spoke once more. This is a situation that bears further thinking. As such, please wait until tomorrow. We will have your answer then. The clone then waved to the man at his side. Rayon, find this man a place to rest, food to eat and medicine should he require it. Until he has his answer, he is to be treated as an honored guest of the Taurison. The lion-like clone nodded and showed the Jin retainer to a bedroom. The clones waited until the 2 were gone, and then started discussing the situation earnestly. Your opinions? Tora asked. He might be the leader in name, but clones tended to see themselves as equals regardless of rank. I want to help, Hyo said. Jaga nodded. Yeah. You created the Taurison for a situation like this, so it seems wrong to ignore this request. Kuge gave a thumbs up in agreement. Send the request up. I'm sure we'll get the okay, but the real Naruto will want to be informed. Tora thought for a moment. Any point against? What about Wave? Between our original numbers and the people we recruited, we could leave with 3/4 of the Taurison and still have enough people to police the city, Hyo pointed out. And that's not saying we couldn't add more recruits. He made air quotes. If we needed to. Fact is, Wave doesn't need us that much any longer, Jaga added. If we leave enough people behind just in case of an emergency, we can easily have most of the group move out without issue. Everyone is in agreement then? The advisors nodded. I'm sending it up with all this information then, and asking for a response before tomorrow. They nodded again. And the very next day, the Taurison were packing up. Sen no Kuni was waiting. Prank Day 130. Hinata sighed as she entered the Himitsu compound. It had been 3 weeks since the Hyuga heir had stepped inside this building, and she found it had been too long a time. Unfortunately, her new rank included new responsibilities. With the invasion, she'd been added to a chunin scouting/hunting team, and had been tasked with making sure there were no enemy ninja hiding in the towns close to Konoha, or in the forests around them. It had been a tiring and repetitive task. While she was in Konoha every few days, she rarely had more than an hour free, and most of that was spent replacing equipment or meeting with her father. She wasn't completely sure as of why, but the man had changed. Where, in the past, he pushed and pushed and pushed, he now took a much more distant position to her training. He had questions here and there, but the pressure was gone. She couldn't be certain, but rumors were running around the Hyuga compound that people were starting to question his training methods, which also implied issues with his leadership abilities. Niji had been undefeated in his rank until Hayashi had started training him, and she herself had grown in leaps and bounds when freed from the man's training regimen. Hinata herself didn't know what to think about it. She couldn't deny that Naruto's teachings had helped her beyond anything she'd hoped for, but she'd always taken her lack of progress while training under her father to be a personal failing. Now, she was no longer sure. Still, those were thoughts for another moment. Now, she was glad to be back here, where she'd found her confidence. "Ohio, Hinata-chan," a Naruto said as she entered the Himitsu basement training room. Another Naruto waved, his nose on a map. "Good day, Naruto," she said to both with a smile. She then bowed respectfully. "Congratulations on your promotion, sensei." She'd at least managed to keep abreast of the happenings in Konoha while on mission, and had learned that Naruto had finally gotten the promotion he'd long deserved. "Congratulations on your own, student," one of the clones said as both came up. They then bowed the same way as Hinata just had. "That was all because of you, sensei," Hinata said as she rose. "I owe it all to your training." "You don't know anything," the first clone countered. "As one of my teachers says, a hard-working student is all the reward a teacher needs." There was a moment of silence. "What can we do for you, anyway?" "I was hoping," Hinata said, lowering her face as she blushed. She also pushed her fingers together. "That we might continue with the training." The first Naruto, though, for an instant. "I don't see why not." He nodded to the second clone, who returned to his map. "Anything in particular? Do you have any recommendations, sensei?" The Naruto Bunshin nodded. "Well, based on the fight in the arena, it might be a good idea to think about close-range combat while using the Matsuri." Hinata had to agree. She remembered Niji's charge, and had clearly been unprepared for it. "What do you think? Can you create a shadow clone?" he asked. She did so instantly. "Well, there are two ways I can see of going at this," the clone explained. "First, the gentle fist. A charge makes for an easy target and—" Prank Day 132. Normally, Iruka spent his Sundays either training or grading papers. The latter wasn't much of an issue ever since he'd learned the Kage Bunshin, so he'd expected to be able to hone his skills for an entire day inside the Uruhara basement. Having hundreds of people to train against was a boon that gave great results. Unfortunately, the chunin hadn't been prepared to find a ANBU operative right outside his door, holding a message from the Hokage. That was how he found himself in a meeting room seated between Sarutobi Hiruzen and Marino Ibiki. "Thank you for coming," Yamanaka Inoichi said, standing up from his place opposite the Hokage at the table. 4 days ago, I was placed in charge of a team going over academy data for signs of conspiracy. Based on preliminary findings by Yumino Iruka here, Inoichi nodded in the teacher's direction. "After a comprehensive review of said data, I can clearly affirm that academy results have been manipulated on a large scale to force certain students to either abandon the ninja program or be forced to repeat years. Troublesome." Shikaku, present as jonan commander, sighed. The ANBU beside him nodded. "How long has this been going on?" Hiruzen asked. "At least 10 years, Inoichi replied. "Quite probably more. We only checked 10 years' worth of records, and the signs have been there since the beginning." "How was this not noticed before?" Ibiki questioned. "Whoever these people are, they were very good at covering their tracks. Also, they targeted only students without living shinobi relatives, which meant the children had nobody to turn to for answers beyond their teachers," the Yamanaka intelligence agent explained. "Unless someone looked at it from an outside point of view, it was very difficult to find. They selected only a few students per year, and with the modifications starting from the very first exams, there wasn't any trend to break. The targeted students began with failing grades, and those were maintained for the entire term." "Do you have a list of affected students?" the Hokage asked. "Here." Copies were given around the table. The list had 26 names, and Iruka recognized a few of them. He remembered their smiles, their hopes, and their dreams, and those memories made him sick. He'd failed them. Have these? The Hokage started, then stopped. No, have every student who failed to graduate in the past 10 years brought back for retesting. Konoha failed these students, and they deserve their chance at their dream. Everyone nodded. How about those who failed their jonin's test? Shikaku asked. Have those retested too? We don't know to what level this conspiracy infiltrated the system, so retest everything, the Hokage ordered. Inoichi, Iruka, I'm placing you both in charge of this. I want new tests made, ones that outside forces will not be able to manipulate for their own goals. If needed, I'll have new jonin ready to accept teams. There's one issue with your orders, Hokage-sama, Inoichi interrupted. He then handed the village leader a sheet of paper. Please read. There were a couple of seconds of complete silence before the Hokage stamped the paper down on the table so hard that it bounced. What? Iruka sneaked a look. It was a similar list to the previous one, only instead of the recalculated notes there was a status column. And outside Naruto and those who failed the last exam, every line had one of 3 different statuses. Missing, dead or suspected dead. Iruka's stomach curled into a knot. That's not all, Hokage-sama, Inoichi continued. When we had enough proof of his involvement, ANBU were sent to arrest Maki Kazuki, the current maths and history teacher. Said ANBU arrived there to find the house cleaned out, and the man is nowhere to be found. We have infiltrators, Ibiki growled. Beside him, Shikaku scowled. The Hokage rose, and when he did his face was blank as a steel shutter. ANBU guards before me. Said 3 ninja appeared bowing on the other side of the table. Iruka, my secretary if you will. The chunin quickly complied, returning with what he knew was a Naruto clone. Iruka returned with Tsuya just as the Hokage finished relaying orders to Marino Ibiki. Your will, Hokage-sama? She asked. Please have these sent out. Be careful not to miss anything. The clone grabbed the papers she was handed and quickly made her way out. Inoichi, here are your orders, Hiruzen continued. You are to personally interrogate every member of the team that went over the academy data, along with everyone linked to this investigation. I want that leak found. The Yamanaka nodded. Hi, Hokage-sama. Iruka, I'm placing the academy under your command. Recruit whoever is needed. I'm placing my trust in you for this. The chunin rose and bowed. It will be done, Hokage-sama. Shikaku, get me your best hunter team, pronto. I want Maki Kazuki found, and I want him yesterday. The jonin commander simply bowed. Wolf, the ANBU are yours to review. I want Konoha's special forces to be cleared of all suspicion, and any infiltrator found. Work with Inoichi on this. Hi, Hokage-sama. The village leader looked around. This goes without saying, but this entire investigation is now an S-rank secret. There will be no discussion of these matters outside those already involved and present here, understood? Hi, Hokage-sama. All ninja replied in chorus. You have your orders, all. Meeting adjourned. Hiruzen said, turning toward the door. I expect quick results from you all. He then walked out the door, and the room quickly emptied after him. Prank Day 138. Saki couldn't help but look around as she entered her apartment. She felt watched, and from multiple directions. And she hated that feeling. She suspected it had to do with the recent overhaul in the ANBU Corps. She had no clue why, but something had lit a fire under the higher-ups, and they were revetting everyone in a search for spies. She'd even passed a day in torture and interrogation, being examined by a Yamanaka after they asked for volunteers. She didn't have anything to hide. There were, however, those that had refused such measures, and that meant everyone was looking over their shoulders, wondering. She was glad she had a week's vacation incoming, as going to work had become a painful chore, even worse than it usually was on her team. Hopefully, whatever was happening would pass by the time she came back on the clock. Then she stepped into her bedroom, and froze. Someone had gotten inside her room. A quick glance to the side revealed that the warding seals hadn't activated, but her carpet clearly indicated someone had stepped into her room. She'd made sure this morning, as she did every morning, to place her carpet in such a way that anyone stepping on it would disturb its pattern. Maybe it was paranoid of her, but the hazing she'd faced when she'd started in ANBU had stayed with her. A slow look across her room found nothing. All the other tells she used were intact, so either someone had gotten in and out without touching anything other than the carpet, and without affecting the seals, or the intruder was still inside. And there was no reason to take risks. Suetun, Susan Nagar. Saki invoked, water flowing from her hands. She disliked using this technique in her bedroom, as it would take at least an hour to remove the water from everywhere, but better that than be ambushed. An inch of water quickly covered the floor, then the walls and finally the ceiling. Her chakra-filled water found nothing. Bed it was, then. Exit the bed, whoever you are, she ordered. 2 seconds and I drown you where you are. Normally, she wouldn't even give the warning, but cleaning up her mattress afterward would take twice as long as the floor, and she was tired. Her top pillow transformed into a man in a burst of smoke, and he nodded at her. I see your rank is well deserved, he said, as if he wasn't in any danger. What do you want? She recognized him instantly. He was one of those commonly known as the Thetais, who'd turn the invasion around. A second's thought made her realize why this person might be here, and she allowed herself to hope. The man withdrew a scroll from a side pouch. Aokusaki, correct? She nodded. As per the Sandaime Hokage's orders, you are activated as a Thetais starting this very instant. Here are the relevant papers, as well as your mask. He handed her the scroll. A few seals cancelled her technique, the water on the ceiling and walls quickly pooling on the floor. She gave the scroll a quick read, noting the Hokage's seal at the bottom of the document. A quick hand seal confirmed that this was the real thing, and she smiled. Ever since Namikamono has been promoted to team leader, the sexist prig had been a pain in her neck. He took great pleasure in contradicting everything she said, and took credit for all of the team's successes. Kurokuma, as usual, did nothing, cold as he was, and Kujikabato was a newbie who wasn't going to do anything to draw attention. She'd given serious thoughts on leaving ANBU, but she didn't feel like returning to the regular ninja corps yet. Transferring to a new branch, especially an anti-invasion one like the Thetais, seemed the best bet. A quick surge of chakra released her new mask from the seal. It was silly, with a long feather-like mustache and what looked like a patch of grass on her head, with flower attached, but it was no worse than the tacky purple and mustard monstrosity that the ninja recruiting her wore. She quickly hid her long hair in the attached net. Only then did she nod in the direction of her fellow Thetais, indicating her readiness to go. The ninja nodded back, then generated a shadow clone who quickly took her shape. Said clone went to the cupboard where she stored her cleaning products, withdrew her mop, and started cleaning up. She smiled at that. The Thetais led her to a side window, somehow opened it without triggering her alarms, and indicated for her to go first. Once on the other side, he quickly led her to the closest sewer access, and ran straight in. She followed. The two of them quickly switched to ceiling running, and 10 minutes found them in a large chamber through which many different channels flowed. 4 Thetais were already there, and 2 more arrived not a minute later. 8 people, Saki noted. 2 teams of 4. If her deductions were correct, there would be 3 more new members like her here. Welcome, new recruits, one of the Thetais said while the others disappeared in puffs of smoke. Among all applicants, you 4 have been selected to form a new Thetais cell. He ran his fingers through his visibly fake beard. My name is Kyoha, and I will be your contact with the rest of the organization. Any requests, be it for training, equipment, or information, will go through me. I will also be the one to dispatch you on missions once your training is complete. He paused for a moment. Since all of you are already proficient in the basics, we will first be focusing on the 2 main techniques you will need as Thetais, the Kage Bunshin and the Kawarimi, Kyoha explained. The Kawarimi? Saki exclaimed in surprise. That's an academy technique. Everyone here can do that. The Kage Bunshin made sense, since masses of clones were known to have died during the invasion. But the replacement technique? Then, flower, Kyoha said, pointing at her. She could hear the smile in his voice. What's the maximum distance you can do with the Kawarimi? Saki didn't know how to answer. Kawarimi wasn't made for distance, and she never used it in that manner. Shunshin was more efficient for those kind of distances. 100 meters, at least, she finally answered. I can do 50 times that, and I'm not the best at distance, the Thetais pointed out. How about something like this? He disappeared. She didn't even have time to see where he appeared before she was switched against her will. She appeared a couple of feet above the water, easily 20 meters down a side tunnel. Luckily, he'd switched her close to the wall, so she grabbed hold before falling face first into sewer water. A quick shunshin from there, and she was back with the rest. I withdraw my objection, she said clearly. She could see where the ability to switch easily with others could come handy, especially paired with the Kagebunshin. He'd proven his point. Good, Kyuha withdrew a scroll for each new member. Here are the instructions for the Kagebunshin. Read them now. I'll answer any questions you have on the subject. Taicho, another of the new members, asked, raising her hand. Saki was surprised to note it was also a woman. AMBU tended to be at least 75% male. Are we always going to be meeting here? One could hear the disgust in her voice. Kyuha shook his head. No. This is a temporary meeting place while a permanent one is being built. All Dukeishi cells are made to work separately and be as independent as possible to prevent infiltration. As for team leadership, I am not to be considered your leader. Who gives orders will have to be decided among you. I am simply your trainer and contact. Is everyone okay with that? Yes, sir. Every new member answered in chorus. They knew a rhetorical question when they heard one. No sir needed here. You can all call me Kyuha, and use whatever nicknames you feel most appropriate between yourselves, he countered. Now, for the Kagebunshin. The most important aspect of the Jutsu is the Prank Day 142. Today, we'll talk about rumors, Jiraiya said from his place in the meeting room. Wait a minute, Nico said, looking through his notes. Didn't you say a few days ago that rumors were the least valid source of information? Beside him, the real Naruto nodded. This was their 5th lesson in Spycraft. Unfortunately, Jiraiya wasn't the best at keeping an exact schedule. Lessons came whenever he was available. When he did teach, however, the results were always good. The man clearly had a plethora of experiences, and had tips for nearly everything under the sun. He'd even helped the Earth Ninjutsu team by teaching them a few basic Doton techniques. I did. Rumors are clearly what spies should rely on the least, the Sannin explained. However, rumors tend to be the first form of information that is available. Thing is that there are 2 forms of rumors, normal ones, and deliberate ones. And finding which one a rumor is can give a lot of insight into its source, and how to react to it. How so? Naruto asked. Let's take a basic example. There's a city with a gold mine, and there's a rumor going through the bars that the gold's running out. What could be the cause of that? Well, the gold might really be running out, Nico pointed out. Of course, Jiraiya said with a nod. The miners might not have found anything in a few days, and word of mouth might have spread. What else? Well, Naruto started, then couldn't find something else to add. After a moment of silence, Jiraiya finally spoke up. Think about it another way. What could be the impacts of such a rumor? Well, the value of gold might go up, Nico said. He was a former member of the merchant clones, so supply and demand were things he knew well enough about. Miners might start fearing for their jobs, also, Naruto added. The Sannin nodded. Yes, among other things. And those are the main points of a deliberate rumor. That kind of rumor comes up because of an expected result, not out of word of mouth or simple truth. The mine owner might have started that rumor out of simple greed, trying to maximize his profits by artificially raising prices. A rival of the mine owner might have does it to cause panic among his rival's employees. There are dozens of different reasons why such a rumor might have been created, outside the truth itself. Makes it difficult to find out what's really happening, Naruto said. Which is why rumors are the least reliable source of intelligence, Jiraiya reiterated. Added to that is the fact that rumors are fluid, and change with time. By the time you hear about it, a rumor might be completely different from what was originally said. Nico wrote something down. Can you give an example? The Sannin smiled. Here's an example I encountered in the past. An artist comes back from an island vacation saying he'll treasure the place always. Someone overhears the words island and treasure, and from there the rumor starts. Now, later down the line, someone replaces treasure with gold, because any good treasure is gold. Another adds pirates into it, because who else but pirates would put their treasure on an island? Of course, Naruto replied, lips curling. Another adds traps, because how else is the treasure still there? Jiraiya continued. The next, piles of corpses to represent everyone who tried and failed. I think you get the point by now. Yes, Nico answered, having noted everything. But I don't see how that's useful. Well, this particular rumor isn't of much interest to ninja. But you have to remember that every rumor has a grain of truth inside of it, in this case something about an island, the Toad Sage explained. Say the rumor was that a clan would get revenge on the Fire Lord by killing him. A rumor like that would be much more important to follow up on. And how does someone do that? By going back to the source and finding its origin, Jiraiya replied. In the case of a normal rumor, that will be the least modified account, therefore the most valid. In the case of a deliberate rumor, you'll find the person who's trying for something, Naruto continued. Jiraiya grinned. Exactly. Now you remember the lesson I gave you about body language, tics and liars? Nico nodded, withdrawing a number of pages. Applying that lesson is crucial to reach the truth. Some people might lie, either because they have something to gain or because they shouldn't have heard whatever the rumor is about, and in the case of deliberate rumors the source will try anything to hide its part in it. Noted, Nico said, writing it down. Now, the best way to hear rumors depends on who's doing the searching, Jiraiya continued the lesson. For men, bars are the classic place to go, along with. Naruto nodded along, focusing on the lesson as much as he could. It wasn't the type of thing that interested him, but he needed to learn this. He'd failed once, and the invasion had cost him more than he could bear. With the Torison halfway to San no Kuni, going at civilian speeds, he needed to pick this up as quickly as he could. He had the feeling the samurai would need those skills before long. Never again was he going to let something like the invasion happen. Prank Day 145. His brother and sister didn't realize it, but Sabaku no Gaara was glad to back in Suna. Even though he'd found someone he could call a friend in Konoha, Suna was still his home. It wasn't the people, who still looked at him in fear and hid, but the land. He could feel the sand all around him for miles, and it was a real comfort. Not knowing everything around him made him twitchy, and he now realized the stress made him react more violently. But that was the past. The trip from Konoha to Suna had been a pain. While Mother had been silent around Naruto for some reason, she hadn't been on the way to Suna. Mother had raged for blood the whole time, and he'd been forced to hold back his sand from reaching out to kill multiple times during the trip. Those from Suna recognized the signs and kept their distance, but the Konoha ninja with them did no such thing, and he was forced to restrain his sand in their case. He promised Naruto not to kill unless there was no other solution, and he intended to keep his word. Such actions would also hurt any chance of rekindling the Suna-Konoha alliance, which was the reason why he was back in sand. Turning, he made his way down one of Suna's main streets. The time now was the best for being out, not the cold of the desert night nor the heat of Suna's days, but in between both. It was the most comfortable. As usual, people moved quickly out of his path. Naruto had said that he would find others who cared for him, but he expected this to be long in coming. For the moment, he had at least a meter free on each side, and people farther up the street changed direction rather than walk on the same street as him. It hurt somewhat. Surprisingly, a man coming out of a shop to his left moved straight toward him. For a moment, Gaara thought the man hadn't seen him, only for him to stop and raise his hand, as if to talk. "Many excuses, sir," the man said. "Might you know where I could find a ramen shop?" He was of average height for an adult, so taller than Gaara, and judging by what he wore he was newly arrived in Suna. It explained a lot. "Continue straight east," Gaara said, pointing, "until the building in red farther down the street. Turn left there and walk down 4 blocks, and you'll be in the dining quarter. I do not know of any restaurant specializing in ramen, but if one exists in Suna, it will be found there." "Many thanks, young man," he replied, bowing. "Would you mind talking some more? I am new to this place, and the help of a native is just what I'd need." "I'll pay for your meal in exchange," the man said with a smile. Gaara thought for a moment. He wasn't particularly hungry, but had to admit a good conversation would do some good. He'd gotten somewhat used to Naruto's place, where he could converse easily, and found he missed it somewhat. Comparing Suna's ramen with Konoha's might be something Naruto would be interested in, when the two of them met once more. He could do his rounds later, when everyone was asleep. "I have no problem with keeping you company." "No need to pay for my meal," Gaara countered. "I insist." Gaara bowed his head in acceptance. He wasn't planning to eat much, anyway. The man started talking, asking questions as soon as he turned in the right direction. Gaara, in exchange, gave straight answers, walking beside the man. There was no fear there, he found, but there was something eerily familiar in the conversation, something he couldn't put his finger on. Then he noticed a pair of goggles on the man's arm. He'd seen those on some clones, he was sure. As a ninja, Gaara didn't believe much in coincidence, but still, he needed to verify. He paused, taking a deep breath. Is there a problem? The man asked, curious. Gaara said nothing, focusing on his senses. He wasn't practiced much in chakra sensing, but he still had the aptitude. At this range, he could identify people as long as he concentrated. The man's chakra felt like many different things, as did anyone's. Wind first, sand and earth next, then an undercurrent that felt like nature to his senses. But under all that, there was the mixture of sensations he'd associated with the many Narutos he'd met. A clone, then? No, nothing, Gaara said, starting to walk again. A small smile appeared on his lips. His friend hadn't left him all alone. It took a while, but Gaara did find a restaurant that served ramen. It wasn't a stand like the place Naruto had shown him in Konoha, but it did allow the two of them to have an isolated booth. The pair of them were served very quickly, and Gaara waited until the server was gone before starting with his part of the conversation. Welcome to Suna, Naruto, was what he said when he finally did. The person opposite him simply smiled at that. How could you tell? I know how you and your clones feel, Naruto, so feeling your chakra was proof enough, Gaara explained. Those goggles on your arm are a big hint, also. Naruto snapped his fingers. You got me. Can I ask what you're doing in Suna? Quite a few things, the clone answered. First was, I was pretty sure you wouldn't mind having someone to talk with. Add to that quick communication between Konoha and Suna with the negotiations going on, the ability to expand my trade network some and to see how another ninja village is run. It's no wonder you can find me here. Thank you, Gaara said. He knew Naruto some by now. He would have still come if only for him. My pleasure, the Kage Bunshin replied. Now, what should I expect from Suna? Well, like I said the day we met, most important is the temperature, the sand genin explained. It's frigid cold at night, and blisteringly hot during the day. I could tell you were from outside the village by looking at your clothes, because what you currently wear is simply wrong for most if not all of the day. Noted, the clone replied quite seriously. Gaara took a bite of his noodles. Not as good as Konoha's, in his opinion. Second is water. With our climate, water is at a premium, and Prank Day 150. Business was picking up for the Merchant Council. Part of it was his contacts finally bouncing back from the damage inflicted by the invasion, while another part was Jiraiya's help. The man had fingers in every pie, and contacts within many of Konoha's shops. As such, between the Kuroneko's rising reputation and the sage's help, the network had more orders than ever before. Unsurprisingly, most of the shops Jiraiya was involved with were brothels, bars, massage parlors, and bookstores. Still, the transportation of alcohol was very lucrative, and even with their lower rates they made good profit. Torikoishi was on his third run to water country since the invasion, this time with an order bigger than any before. It seemed like Tucci was planning on adding new dishes to his menu, since he'd never ordered kirimasu before. Normally, those fish were either for the Konoha Zazenkyo or the Koju. Their supplier for those was a family with an estate in Yunokuni, who had a number of large lakes filled with the things. It was somewhat off the beaten path, but perfect for clones. The jumper did another long-distance switch, this time appearing on top of a tall oak. His feet instantly glued to the bark, proof that the training they'd done hadn't been fruitless. He then turned to get his bearings. Another pair of jumps should have him close enough to land. That was when he noticed the smoke in the distance. He thought for a moment that this was a forest fire, but it seemed too small for something like that. But it was in the direction of the network's supplier. Torikoishi didn't wait. He jumped straight in that direction, as far as he could. He did another jump in midair, his legs nearly twisting as he landed on the tall pine in the middle of the estate. The place was a total loss. The fire had clearly been burning for a while. The second floor was gone, as were two of the walls. Every meter of fence was broken, and the lakes were filled with dead fish lying belly up. Most of the trees on the estate had been uprooted, and the place was silent as the dead. Torikoishi scowled in disgust, and quickly generated 5 more clones. Without a word, they rushed over the scene. Black balls quickly extinguished the flames, only to reveal what had happened there. Their supplier and his wife were dead. The first was a charred body, recognizable only because of his wedding ring, but the wife had been in the kitchen, and had survived the flames mostly unscathed. She clearly died from a stab wound to the back, fresh blood everywhere on the back of her dress. The group went over everything, but nothing else could be found. Whoever had done that had even made sure to kill each and every animal on the property, leaving none alive. This was clearly not the work of bandits. The clones dug graves for the fallen, and buried them with as much honor as they could. Inside they were seething. They had a good idea who had done this, as well as the cause. Those false NBU were back in business, and they were clearly playing for keeps. Chapter 24 Skirmishes, Prank Day 151. Traveling at civilian speeds was hell for Naruto's clones. With San no Kuni being past the country on the peninsula, the clones could have made their way there in a couple of days if they'd been going at full speed. It would have taken 4 days at most getting to where they were now. It took the group 3 full weeks by caravan to get to Jinsho, the capital of the Jin province and hometown of their current employer. The leaders of the Taurison had discussed their entry in the 2 days before it happened, and had come to an agreement. A small force of mercenaries, all clones, went ahead of the main group with a message from Getsuko, and would be supplementing the young heir's guard, while the rest of the force would arrive all at once by caravan. The main reasons for that were twofold. First, as they were, supposedly, samurai and not ninja, infiltrating the city little by little would only hurt their cover. Second was that they wanted reactions. That was part of Jiraiya's spike raft training. One found a thread and pulled until everything unraveled. By entering this way, as a show of force, the group was sure to cause something to happen. Tora, who was looking around from his place at the front of a chariot, already didn't like what he was seeing. He'd gotten used to the various reactions the group invoked while passing through cities, and this was one of the most depressing yet. The streets were empty save a few drunks here and there, and he couldn't help but notice civilians at the windows looking at the group with fear and caution. He'd expected at least some hope here and there, but he couldn't find any trace of that. It took a good 30 minutes before the Torison's caravan arrived at the gates of the Jin residence. The place was a manor at least, if not a palace, and had walls with guards at every 10 meters. The members that had been sent as an advance force were present there, along with the other retainers. Said retainers looked tired, as if they'd had long days with little sleep, and that did not inspire confidence in the least. Still, that didn't stop him from doing his job. As soon as the chariots were inside the compound, Tora dispatched everyone to their respective places. A good quarter of the troop were going straight to the walls, with others connecting with the members of the staff present. Getsuko stepped down when an older man came forward. He went before him and bowed. "I return as promised, Yatsuko-san." The elder reached down and hugged Getsuko, something which clearly surprised the retainer. "Is everything fine, Yatsuko-san?" The older man's face fell. "Tsubian did not make it." Getsuko nodded sadly at the words, and waved Tora down from his place. The leader of the Torison felt like an intruder interrupting their moment, but still came down. He then bowed to the elderly servant. "You need not bow to me, Samurai-sama," the elder said, bowing deeper. "I am Yatsuko, seneschal of the Jin family, and I thank you for accepting our selfish request. May I be of any use?" he asked. "I would meet your lord, if it is possible," Tora asked. The man bowed again. "I will get you an audience at once," he replied, and quickly went inside. Tora then waited as the rest of his council fell beside him. He knew very little about their employer. Getsuko had remained tight-lipped about his lord, not offering information, and the group had mostly focused on what they would need to do once they arrived, and who would be opposing them. The only descriptive they had was young, and the fact that he was the last remaining member of the family. And young could mean many things when regarding nobility. A 25-year-old lord would be young by their standards. The group did not have to wait long before Yatsuko returned. "Jin-sama will see you now." The 5 leading members stepped forward, following the seneschal into the building. Surprisingly, the man led them down to the basements, stopping before a room guarded by 4 retainers with swords. 2 of them opened what was a heavy steel door, and inside was clearly a storage room repurposed as a meeting hall with a bedroom attached. "Please take a seat," Yatsuko said, indicating a number of cushions on the floor. The 5 Taurison sat, removing their swords and laying them beside their seats as honor demanded. The retainer came back a minute later from deeper inside the room, introducing Jin Shippa, lord of the Jin family. The 5 members bowed as a second person came to sit on a raised throne in the middle of the room. Tora managed a glance before averting his eyes, and was surprised. The Jin lord was a girl, and very young at that. Tora wasn't sure, but he estimated that the real Naruto was older than her by at least a year. Thankfully, his bowed head would hide his reaction. Rise, members of the Torison, and be welcome to our lands, Shippa said, clearly trying for an authoritative tone. The samurai rose. Tora forced himself not to react outwardly, and decided to treat the situation as if he was speaking to any other member of the nobility. With the many experiences the Naruto clones had, this was something they knew how to do. Thank you for your hospitality, Jin-sama, he said, bowing slightly once more. It is us who must thank you, she replied. The members of your group already present have been a boon to my retainers, and it may very well be that we still breathe only because of your men. The last few days have been restful like no others lately, and that is clearly due to your service. Thank you for the kind words, Tora answered. Now, what services do you require of the Torison? As Getsuko told you, both my person and my people require your services, the Lord explained. Along with the samurai currently supplementing my guard, I would like 4 or so bodyguards for my person. The most important part of your troop will be needed in the city, cracking on Yakuza businesses and enforcing the law. You will, unfortunately, have little help with that part. I no longer have enough retainers to protect my own house, and the police have been eliminated to a man in the last few months. Ideally, I would like to see those who blight our lands executed for their crimes, but it is the safety of my people that takes priority, and I will be content if the Yakuza lose the ability to do our land further harm. We will begin at once, Jin-sama, the Torison leader replied, preparing to leave, when something came to mind. Any requests for those who will be your bodyguards? The girl thought for an instant. Who are the strongest amongst your group, mister? She blushed, suddenly realizing she had no clue about the individual names of the mercenaries before her. I am Tora, Jin-sama, the leading bunshin replied with a smile. And the strongest among the group are all in this room. That was simply pretension, since the clones were all generally at the same level, but they'd found that people believed such a thing more easily. Then you, Tora, along with the man at your right. I am Rayon, Jin-sama, said man replied. Rayon, yes, with 2 other members of your choice, Shippa continued. I will trust my safety in your hands. As you will, Jin-sama, Tora said, rising and bowing with the other Torison. We will enact your edicts immediately. By your leave. Go, the Lord said with a nod and a smile. And may the gods smile on your works. The 5 of them quickly made their way out, and were led to a wing of the mansion that had been reserved for Torison use. They found and ducked inside an empty room as soon as they could. So, opinions? Tora asked as soon as the door was closed behind them. Am I the only one who finds it sad for a person of that age to be at the head of a region this big? Kuga said, looking at his fellows. Everyone shook their head in answer. You're not the only one, Tora voiced, but it doesn't change anything. If she asks for help, we'll give it to her, but we can't do much about it. She clearly feels the need to act as if she was an adult, and worse is she may very well be right. We don't know enough about the situation to say otherwise. That's the first thing to fix, then, Hyo pointed out. The official Torison leader nodded. Yes. And get the merchant network in on it. This is right up their alley. And we don't know if this is something with global repercussions, like the situation in Wave. While the entirety of Gato's business had officially fallen into the hands of the clone network 15 days after his death, making that the complete truth was still a work in progress nearly 3 months after the fact. Selling properties, ensuring the arrests of criminals, finding caches and sealing legitimate businesses took time, especially if one wanted to do so without drawing too much attention. Everyone agreed with a nod. Rayon, take 3 clone members with you and go back to the Lord. If she asked, tell her that I will have the second shift, said Clone nodded and took off. Hyo, Kuga, you're in charge of patrols. I'm leaving the specifics up to you. I just want more men on the ground than in Wave for whenever something happens. Yes, sir! They both exclaimed. Jaga, you're in charge of the defending this place, Tora continued. You should already have enough men on hand. Speak to me if you need more. I'll be doing my own personal patrol, just to get a good eye for the layout. He looked around. Everyone has his orders, so let's get cracking. This place won't fix itself by doing nothing. Hi! Everyone responded, each going in their own direction. There was work to be done. Prank Day 154. So, merchant's status report. The real Naruto asked from his place at the head of the table. The network representative rose. Well, as most already know, the false Ambu are back in the interference business. There were nods all around the table. Outside are Kirimasu suppliers who were eliminated, We have 3 other sources in other countries who now refuse to do business with us for the flimsiest of reasons, and a pair of jumpers had to escape when mercenaries attacked them. All that in the past week? Jiraiya asked. The spokesman of the merchants simply nodded. And no events like this had happened since the false ANBU base was found. The sage scowled. I don't like this. It sounds a little too much like Root to me. You're not the only one who made the link. No, the Hokage's Bunshin replied. And? Danzo is under watch as usual, and nothing indicates any link to this group, the Sandaime answered. All former Root members are accounted for, and the 3 outside Konoha were confirmed to be with their respective teams for the entire period those false ANBU would have been active. No missing members? Jiraiya said, making a face. I find that surprising. There are some that are missing and presumed dead, but those under that heading have been so for nearly a decade, Hiruzen explained. A good number of former Root members went missing during the Kyuubi's attack, and you know how many empty graves there were following that event. The Toad Sannin scowled again, and said nothing. Naruto did, however. What's Root? The Hokage turned to the blonde with a smile. They were a former Black Ops ANBU branch headed by a man named Danzo. They were outside the normal Konoha hierarchy, and did assassination missions, infiltrations, and the like. They were disbanded 5 years ago after it was found they had abused their privileges and performed missions opposed to Konoha's policies. So, in a way, they were the ancestors of the Dukeshi, Naruto countered. No! Hiruzen cried out, slamming his hand on the table. The Dukeshi are nothing like Root was. Root was amoral, doing whatever it could to oppose what it saw as enemies of Konoha, regardless of who they were. They started wars, assassinated Konoha civilians, and even tried to have me removed by force as I was seen as too peaceful for Konoha to prosper. I will hear no word that the Dukeshi are in any way similar to Root, and want you to put the idea completely out of your mind. Naruto gulped. Hi, Hokage-sama, he quickly answered. He then shook his head, dispelling the mental image he had of the Dukeshi fighting the Sandaime to the death. It wouldn't happen, not while he had a say about it. Still, we need to solve this. Unfortunately, there isn't much I can do outside of the village, the Sandaime pointed out sadly. If you give me a list of your suppliers, I'll see what my own network can find out, Jiraiya added. It isn't much, but we might find something out. The real Naruto thought for an instant. What would the both of you think would be needed to take this group out? Jiraiya and the Sandaime looked at each other, and Hiruzen nodded at his student. Finding where they operate from is first, certainly, the sage explained. Infiltrating the place is then a good second step, if it is possible. If not, more general information gathering will be needed. After that, there's 2 ways of going at it, depending on the group's structure. You either take out the leadership, hoping that there isn't a strict hierarchy that'll allow a successor to take over easily, or you take out the troops one by one, hoping they can't replace them easily. And if both methods don't work? Nico asked, curious. Then, you get ready for a battle of attrition, the Toad Sannin countered. Those are long and bloody, and they tend not to be worth it. Such a plan will keep an enemy busy with your forces, at minimum. Noted, Naruto replied. Nico, set up a troop under your command. Their job will be to watch over our suppliers, and track our mystery ANBU to wherever they lair. We'll get to step 2 once that's done. Hi! The clone said, saluting. Next point then. Naruto continued. Techniques. We had people going over our library, and there still isn't any agreement on how we should do things. Right, another council member started. I had 24 clones going over everything, and we still can't find common ground, even after a few weeks. The numbers are split into multiple small groups, each with his own idea on what to do. Prank Day 155. Ebisu had to admit his team was shaping up well. By now, at the rate of 2 or 3 D-ranked missions a day, the group was well past 50 missions of that rank. They had more than enough to start on C-ranked missions, if Ebisu decided to do so. Still, he hesitated. It wasn't his team's teamwork. No, that had never been an issue. The 3 of them had hit the ground running, and there had never been problem at that level. Unsurprisingly, Naruto was the leader of the 3, something which didn't surprise him with the boy's personality. The other 2 were clearly followers, and had followed his plans from day 1. The special jonan had to agree that the boy had some talent in leadership, so that was a good thing. He supposed his 2 other genin had either picked up on the fact, or had been intimidated by the boy's techniques. He was the powerhouse of the group, that was certain. Part of his hesitation was the so-called C-ranked curse. He'd faced it when younger himself, when a simple career mission ended up with his own team facing the 7 swordsmen of the mist. If Guy's father Dewey hadn't been close enough to assist, he shuddered to think what would have happened to them. He visited the man's tomb every year on the anniversary of his death, drinking the pain away with his team. But there was also something else. He couldn't put a name to it, but there was something going on with his team. It wasn't anything bad, just a feeling he couldn't shake, but there it was. Mainly because everything was going too well. There were no altercations. No fights, no extra sparring. Nothing bizarre that stuck out. It was like the 3 of them had been a team for years. They were used to each other in a way that you normally saw after years of working together, if even then. Yes, the Hokage had said that they were more advanced than normal genin, but this was ridiculous. Still, keeping the group from C-rank missions because things were going too well felt wrong. Team 1 turned the corner, coming back from their latest D-rank, when Ebisu saw what he hoped would be his future team. Konohamaru was there, along with Udan and Moegi, his ever-present shadows. Then the boy saw him. "Ah. So you're the poor team that got saddled with 4 eyes here," Konohamaru said, making a face. "Well, better you than me, that's for sure." Those words hit Ebisu right in the gut. "Omego-sama." That gut hit a disgusted face. The special jonin was surprised to see Naruto stepping up before him. "You take that back." "What?" "I don't know who the hell you are, but no one insults my sensei," the blonde replied. "Especially not a pipsqueak that doesn't know his left from his right." "You tell him," Miramara said, stepping beside his teammate. Ariko quickly moved to the other side, and her face was grim. "If he's the only guy who taught you anything, I could probably take you," Konohamaru boasted, stepping up. "Easy at that. You want a piece of me?" Ebisu stepped between the two group. "Everyone calm down," he ordered. "Team 1, this is the Hokage's grandson, Konohamaru, along with Moegi and Udan. As they are academy students and you are ninja, fighting them is prohibited." Konohamaru smiled. "You're just afraid they'll lose and prove me right. Anyway, I have better things to do. Good luck, wannabes." He then walked away with his group trailing behind him. Naruto took a deep breath to calm himself. "Sorry about that, sensei," he finally replied. "You need to control your emotions better, Naruto." Ebisu then turned to the other 2. "That goes for the both of you, also. There will be many in the future who will do things like this to get a reaction out of you, and there are situations where acting like this could cause an automatic mission failure." I know, Naruto said. "Just insulting the team? In the middle of the village?" He scowled. "That shouldn't fly." The special jonin smiled. "Thank you for defending my honor, but if the words of an academy student could hurt me, I'd be stripped of my rank instantly." He turned around. "Now, to the mission center. There is a second mission waiting for us there, and sooner started soonest done." Inside, he smiled. He couldn't help but be proud of his team's reaction, misguided as it was. He now felt silly for holding back because of a simple feeling. Give it a few more days to find the right C rank, no missions near water, for sure, and they'd be moving to the next level. They were ready for the next level, he was sure. Unfortunately, having his back turned, he missed Naruto's summoning of a single shadow clone. "They looked pretty tough, actually," Udan pointed out as the trio arrived at a training ground. "You sure we could take them?" Konohamaru scowled. "If Ebisu's all they had? Sure. Man's useless. If he was so good a teacher, why couldn't he teach a technique that could actually hit the sand aim?" "Prove it," came a voice from behind him. The 3 students turned around to find the blonde boy from before. "You again?" "Yeah, me again," he answered. "Name's Naruto, and I don't take people insulting my team lying down." "You're just gonna cry to you teacher when I beat you," the Sarutobi child jeered. "Nope. If you manage to beat me, I'll deserve the beating," he smiled. "Tell you what. I'll even teach you the technique of your choice, if you actually manage to put me down." "For real?" By now, Naruto's smirk was positively hellish. "I'll even make it easier. I'll only fight back with a single technique. An academy one, to make things fair." That was the last straw. Konohamaru drew one of his academy kunai. "You're on." He then charged straight at the blonde. Said blonde easily dodged the first swing, then the second, then the third. He was moving back all the while giving ground, adding comments like, "You're telegraphing your moves, your stance is wrong, and you're not aiming at the right places." But after a minute of evading, Konohamaru had finally backed his foe against one of the pools that dotted the training ground. "Can't retreat anymore, can you?" the student said with a smile. "A valid tactic, I had to admit," Naruto replied. He then grinned evilly. "My turn." He was then gone, and a second later Konohamaru found himself in the air and in freefall. He was there only a few seconds before he hit the pool with a splash. He quickly came back up to find Naruto smiling at him. "Had enough?" The student scowled. "Not until I see you on the ground." The blonde shrugged. "Your choice." He then vanished once more. That set the tone for the next few minutes. Konohamaru found that he couldn't even get out of the pool. As soon as he answered Naruto, he found himself back in freefall and headed straight for the middle of the water. "I'll never give up!" he finally shouted. Naruto shook his head. "I can respect tenacity as much as anybody, but this is ridiculous." Konohamaru simply swore. "Suit yourself." And the academy student was back in the air once more. Only this time, there was a clear difference. He was higher, true, but the main thing was that he wasn't headed for the pool this time. He was headed for the ground. "No!" he yelled, and braced himself for impact. At the last moment, he felt another switch, and a second later he was underwater once more. And once more, he broke for air. As usual, Naruto was there with his smile. Had enough this time? Yes, he finally admitted. The blonde could have let him break his legs on solid earth at any time, he now realized. And there was nothing he could do about it. Then something came to mind. "You cheated, though." Naruto inclined his head in thought. "How?" "That's no academy technique." That, actually, was the Kawarimi technique, when done by someone with a lot of training, Naruto countered. "Really?" Moegi said as she came up, with Udan not far behind. "Really," Naruto replied. "Why do you think those 3 specific techniques are taught to everyone at the academy? The clone technique is great for distractions, especially when escaping. The transformation technique is the basis for all infiltration and social manipulation, and the body replacement technique is a very efficient dodging method." "Yeah, but you can't beat someone with them," Konohamaru pouted. "You notice you're saying that when I just beat you with Kawarimi, right?" Naruto said with a smile. "Anyway, Bunshin is great for leading people into traps, and I even knocked out the Hokage once with a modified henge." At those words, Konohamaru was all over Naruto. "Teach me how, sensei. Tell me how to beat the Hokage." This took Naruto aback instantly. "You want to beat your own grandfather?" he asked. "Why would you do that to Gigi?" "I'll beat him, and take the Hokage's mantle from him, just you see," the Sarutobi child answered. Naruto's eyes went wide in incredulity. Then he started laughing. That's not how it works, kid. Trust me, I know." "Yeah, right. Anyway, say you're right. You managed to beat Gigi somehow, and now you're Hokage. How long until someone else comes against you and beats you?" the blonde pointed out. "Someone like me?" Konohamaru opened his mouth, then closed it after a moment. It was clear he never thought about the fact. How does someone become Hokage then?" "There's a lot of things that a person needs," Naruto explained. "He has to be a strong ninja, among the strongest in the village, that's for sure, since the Hokage represents the ninja forces. He has to know politics, economics, strategy and tactics, along with dozens of other subjects. He has to be a proven leader to be a candidate, and be popular enough that the village would follow him. All of that would take years." Konohamaru cried out. "There's a reason why no one has been voted Hokage before his 20s, you know," Naruto pointed out. He knew the third had started earlier, but that had been a battlefield promotion and a completely different thing. The Sarutobi boy simply sighed. "Anyway, how about I help you 3 train?" the clone said with a smile. He couldn't help but like Konohamaru. The boy made him think of a younger version of himself. "Really?" all 3 students replied excitedly. "Really," Naruto said with a nod. "Let's start with what I just used. Can you all tell me the seals for the Kawarimi?" The trio started talking over each other to answer. Naruto simply grinned. He'd had Iruka, and now it was his turn to help those that followed. Prank Day 156. The Taurison had now been doing patrols for a week, and it was clear they'd gotten a reaction from the Yakuza, Silence. The Lord Jin had said that things had calmed down upon the arrival of the first group of mercenaries, and she hadn't joked. Outside of a few drunks here and there, the samurai group hadn't had any issue in the city. It was like whoever the Yakuza were, they turned tail and hid as soon as the Torisan had entered the city. Hugh didn't trust that one bit. Especially revealing were the reactions of the people. The civilians were still clearly afraid, even after a week without enemy action, looking over their shoulders during the rare times they left their houses. There wasn't a kid in sight, even on the brightest periods of the day, and shopkeepers were reluctant to sell anything to the mercenaries. While the Naruto clones didn't drink, the non-Bunshin member of the group did, and alcohol was hard to find. At least the last fact would soon be a problem of the past. There was a merchant team on the way and expected any day now, which would help the alcohol shortage and give the team another point of view on what was happening in the city. Talking to the civilians hadn't helped, the few times they could be found, and they needed information to advance. They would be there for a long time if it didn't come. Prank Day 158. Naruto was surprised to see someone waiting for him at Training Ground 6 when he arrived there after his supper. It took a moment for him to remember who the man was, but he stepped forward as soon as he did. "You're the trap guy, aren't you?" the boy asked as he came up. Two. Takuno, was it? "You got it," the man said with a grin. "Takuno Kanden, jonan and trap specialist." Naruto looked around. "Not that I mind talking to you again, but why are you here?" The jonan simply smiled. "I talked to your sensei a few weeks ago, and he offered to let me take over part of your training whenever I was available. I'd have come earlier, but well, specialists are in high demand, you know." "I'm sure," Naruto replied with his own smile. "Is sensei coming today?" "I am," the special jonan interrupted as he came out of the woods. "If you don't mind, Kanden-san, I'd like to sit in on this lesson of yours." "Be my guest," Takuno answered, then turned to Naruto. "Now let's talk traps. Tags, in particular. What do you know about them?" "They're strips of paper with an explosion sealed inside of them," Naruto replied as he'd been taught in the academy. "They're mainly used in trapping techniques or to improve the power of thrown weapons." "The textbook answer, yes," Takuno replied. "Now, what can you personally do with them?" "A lot of different types of traps, pits, kunai and the like," the blonde enumerated. "I know how to set them on a timer, and how to prime them for contact, along with using them on kunai and shuriken." He stopped for a moment. "Oh, and I also know the Fubaka Hajin." "Nice. The last is very useful, and there are never enough users who know it," Takuna replied. "Now, how about detonating a tag remotely?" Naruto thought for a moment. "No, I don't know that one." "That's a classic, and it has plenty of uses. Here." The jonin handed Naruto a bundle. "Those are training tags I made especially for tonight. They're no more powerful than a firecracker, but they explode bright green, perfect for night training. Now set up 10 of them a meter or so apart on the trees, primed for contact." The genin did so, returning to his spot afterwards. "Now let me show you," Takuno said, whipping out his own tag. He made a visible show of activating the tag, then threw it forward on the ground. "A lot of people don't realize it, but a prime tag is waiting for a burst of chakra," the trap specialist explained. "Normally, said burst comes from another part of the tag which is set up to react to pressure, but there is nothing stopping someone from preempting that and triggering it remotely with a surge of chakra." He pointed dramatically at his tag, which exploded. "Since the tag is already primed, it doesn't need much, just a pencil-thin beam of energy." "Now you try it," the man said with a wave. Naruto pointed straight at one of his tags which were 5 or so meters away, and pushed chakra down his arm, thinking of a laser-like beam. He didn't get the result expected, however. The 10 tags he placed exploded all at once in 10 green flashes. No, Takuno replied instantly. "That's like 20 times too much. With that much chakra, it was more a cone or a wave than a beam." "Really?" Naruto replied. "That's like barely anything." Takuno's eyes went wide. "If I may," Ebisu pointed out from where he was seated. "Naruto has immense chakra reserves, probably greater than mine and yours combined." Takuno looked at the boy as if he was seeing him in a new light. Naruto simply blushed and scratched the back of his head. "Well," the jonin finally replied, "practice makes perfect. Set up another 10, and try again. This time, try to use half what you did the previous time, and try to focus it tighter than before. Will do. While there was slow improvement over the next dozen tries, it still wasn't a complete success. Naruto quickly reached a point where he couldn't use lower amounts of chakra while still being too much, and at best he only caused 3 tags to explode at once out of 10. It's clear that it will take you more than a single days to master this, so let's move on to something else. The man went and withdrew something from a front pocket. Wires, he said, handing Naruto the item. We're still talking about tags, correct? The genin asked. Indeed, Takuno replied. While remotely detonating a bunch of tags close to one another is useful, there are moments when you need more than that. That's when wires come in, the man explained. It's especially useful in demolition, where you might need to stagger different explosions with different timing. Now set up a tag and try it. It's the same concept as the prior exercise, only channeling the chakra down the wire. This time, Naruto succeeded on the first try. That's a lot easier, he pointed out. Yes, Takuno countered. But it has its own flaws. Since you're now reliant on the wire, that's a clear point of failure for enemies to attack. Cutting the string make at least part of the setup useless, and it adds extra visibility to the whole thing. Naruto nodded. Now, there are multiple ways of sidestepping those weaknesses, the jonan continued. First, you can build redundant systems, with multiple lines to connect them. Now of course that means… For his seat on the grass, Ebisu noted everything. He needed to make sure he could continue Takuno's instruction should the man be absent, and building his own knowledge base was always a plus. He could see that sharing teaching duties with Takuno had been the right decision to take after all. Prank Day 170. Team 1 arrived in the mission office at 2 sharp, as was usual. On this particular day, the Hokage was in residence, and he smiled at their arrival. He had a surprise for them. Team 1, reporting for missions, Ebisu exclaimed, standing straight. Beside him, his genin emulated him. Punctual as usual, I approve, the Sandame replied. Now, any preference on this day's mission? A shopping request, if possible, Hokage-sama, said. Ninja nodded and handed the special jonin a scroll. Also, I would reserve a training ground cleanup if you have one available. I do, Hiruzen said with a smile. I also have the mission you requested earlier this week. The older ninja handed Ebisu a different bordered scroll. Naruto gazed at the scroll for a moment. What's so special about this one? Ebisu turned toward his team. The Hokage and I agreed that, based on your training and hard work, it was time for this team to move to C ranks. Really? Miramara asked. Yes, the sensei replied. This is a request for a courier mission to a village near the border with Yama no Kuni. We are to deliver a scroll to the lawman in residence, and bring his reply back to Konoha. Does anyone think they aren't ready for this mission? No, sensei, Ariko replied, while beside her the 2 boys shook their heads quickly. Even the rabbit did the same. This mission should take no more than 2 weeks, so you will need to pack accordingly. We will not be having any training tonight to give you time to do so. We will be leaving tomorrow at 6 in the morning from the east gate, he explained. I expect everyone to be on time. Hi, the 3 genin replied. Now we have 2 missions before us, Ebisu continued. The first client is Shiromatsu in the market district. Team 1 move out. The special jonin cried out. Hi, the trio repeated, turning as one. Both Ebisu and the Hokage could easily see the extra spring in their step from the news. They were clearly ready for it.